Good evening, everybody. Thank you for your patience. Welcome to the open joint study session of the City Council and Planning Commission regarding the housing element. Can we have a roll call, please?
And start the roll call with council members.
Time is 7:13 and the day is Monday, October 16th. Go for it.
Start the roll call with council members. Councilmember Bowles.
Here.
Councilmember Beckmeyer.
Present.
Councilmember Beer. And Councilmember Beer, I understand, is needing to participate remotely pursuant to Government Code Section 54953, which allows remote participation for just cause provisions. Councilmember Beer, can you confirm for the record that you are requesting to participate remotely under Government Code Section 54953 or AB 2449 under the just cause provision? Have to allow, we'll let Councilmember Beer unmute. Can you hear me, Councilmember Beer?
Councilmember Beer, are you able to hear us?
Not.
So I do not believe Councilmember Beer is able to hear
Having an
us.
issue with audio.
No.
All right.
Marty.
Okay. Oh,
Hey there. Oh.
Test, test. Pardon us again as we work out this other technicality.
oh, I see. Yeah,
Let's make sure we're
okay. All right. Thank you. Okay.
Can you hear us
There we
now?
go.
Can you hear us, Councilmember Beer?
I
All
can
right.
hear you now.
All right. Thank you, PCTV. Councilmember Beer, can you confirm for the record that you are requesting to participate remotely under Government Code Section 54953 or AB 2449 under the just cause provision?
Yes, I am.
Councilmember Beer, can you please describe for the record the general circumstances relating to your need to appear remotely?
I can, yeah. It's due to a contagious illness that prevents in-person participation.
Thank you. Under AB 2449, you are required to identify whether any other individuals 18 years of age are present or older are present in the room at the remote location that you're calling from, and identifying the general nature of the relationship if there are.
Thanks, Sarah. No one's here but me.
Thank you, Councilmember Beer. No vote is required for your remote participation due to just cause. Councilmember Beer, you are required to participate remotely through both audio and video technology. And any vote at tonight's meeting will be conducted by a roll call with the council members and planning commissioners.
And Sarah, is it okay for me to mute when I'm not speaking, or do I need to leave my mic on all the time?
You can mute when you're not speaking. Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Continuing with the roll call, note that Mayor Pro Tem Vaterlas is absent from tonight's meeting. Mayor Big Stick.
Is present.
I'll continue with the roll call vote, the roll call for the planning commissioners present. Commissioner Wright,
Present.
Commissioner Godwin,
Present.
Commissioner Ferguson,
Present.
Commissioner Devine,
Present.
Commissioner Berman,
Present.
Vice Chair Leal,
Present.
and Chair Hauser.
Present.
All planning commissioners are present.
I will take a moment to say to Commissioner Berman, welcome back and congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, and excited to be here.
Very good. City Clerk, do we have further participation notes to read?
Tonight's meeting is being held in person with alternate ways to observe and participate in the meeting. Viewers can participate and observe via Zoom webinar with the link provided in the agenda or by dialing in to 1-669-900-6833 and entering webinar ID 811-5615-8241. For those participating remotely, you can observe on Comcast Channel 26 or watch a live stream on www.cityofpacifica.org/livestream. We are accepting live remote public comments for the topic on the agenda tonight. If you're calling in via Zoom, press *9 to raise your hand to request to speak when the mayor opens public comment on the item, and *6 to unmute once called upon by the last 4 digits of your phone number.
So public meetings are a limited public forum, meaning that there are rules for commenting at these meetings. Comments on this agenda item must address the housing element. If comments do not address the housing element, I will provide you with an initial warning to stay on topic. If the warning is not followed, I will direct the city clerk to cut off the microphone. And throughout this warning system, I will seek the assistance of city attorney in identifying comments not related to the agenda item. The City of Pacifica acknowledges that we occupy the unceded ancestral homeland of the Ramaytush Ohlone peoples, who are the original inhabitants of the San Francisco Peninsula. We honor the Ramaytush Ohlone peoples for their enduring commitment to Mother Earth. As the indigenous protectors of this land and in accordance with their traditions, the Ramaytush Ohlone have never ceded, lost, nor forgotten their responsibilities as the caretakers of this place, as well as for all peoples who reside in their traditional territory. We affirm their sovereign rights as First Peoples and wish to pay our respects to the ancestors, elders, and relatives of the Ramaytush Ohlone peoples. Councilmember Beckmeyer, would you please lead us in a salute to the flag?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Tonight for our consideration, a continued joint study session of the City Council and Planning Commission to consider and provide direction on the draft 2023-2031 housing element of the general plan. Proposed action, receive a presentation and provide direction regarding outstanding items on the draft 2023-2031 housing element of the general plan. Can we have a staff report, please, which I imagine will involve introducing the bevy of wonderful support that we have with us in this room this evening. And welcome, everybody. Oh.
Good evening, Honorable Mayor and Council members and Planning Commission Chair and Commissioners. I am Planning Director Christian Murdoch. I'm joined this evening by our Housing Element team of staff, consultants, and City Attorney to continue the joint study session on the Housing Element Update started on September 25th. I'm going to largely jump right into the substance of the matter tonight rather than provide much background. For those that are interested, they can review the staff report and meeting video from September 25th. So for tonight, first we'll start with a recap of one revised program response based on the City Council and Planning Commission feedback on September 25th. Then we will go into the remaining handful of items requiring sites input in relation to HCD comments, California Department of Housing and Community Development, and then provide ample opportunity for council and commission discussion as well as public input. On this September 25th joint study session, among the various Housing Element Program comments that staff sought council and commission feedback on was comment B.3.2.C. These comments are numbered in an attachment to the staff report and correlate to comments from the California Department of Housing and Community Development on the city's first draft housing element submitted for review. The comment we've summarized by the title 100% non-residential sites, and the comment was to analyze the potential for sites that would allow commercial development, the potential for them to develop with 100% commercial, in other words, no residential as part of the housing element site, and the concern being the consequence that would have for provision of housing units under the city's regional housing needs allocation or RHNA obligation. The guidance that staff noted from the Council and Commission on September 25th was that there was a consensus not to include the program proposed by staff based on its professional judgment and interpretation of the comment, which was to read somewhat into the comment and to recommend a zoning policy and general plan policy that would allow 100% residential projects as a permitted use in commercial and mixed-use zoning districts. The key concern that staff heard from the Council and Commission discussion was about the loss of commercial land area and neighborhood viability and vibrancy in our community. And that's underscored by the number of sites in the proposed sites list that would have mixed-use development. And so staff recommends a revised approach based on that feedback, which we will outline on the next slides actually. So we recommend a two-part response. The first one is to demonstrate the past development in Pacifica has resulted in mixed use on these types of sites. Pacifica's recent experience has demonstrated strong market demand for mixed-use development, including commercial and residential land uses, even where 100% commercial projects could be approved. We believe that we can demonstrate that there's also increased economic incentive for mixed-use projects when the maximum densities are increased as proposed in the housing element, anywhere from between 30 to 60 dwelling units per acre, which is an increase anywhere from 36 to 172% over the prior maximum densities. In layman's terms, the prior maximum densities were up to 21.8 units per acre, and even the minimum new mixed-use proposed density would be 30 units per acre under the housing element. So significant additional density, which in other words provides significant additional economic incentive to develop with mixed use rather than 100% commercial. Part two of the proposed response is to demonstrate that the general plan and zoning will actually require mixed use as well. So whereas the prior general plan and C1 and C2 commercial zoning would allow mixed use, it did not require it, and it would allow a 100% commercial project to be approved and constructed. However, the mixed use designations, as staff is envisioning them, and we hope that there's council and commission support, is that it will actually require mixed use. In other words, require residential and commercial component to these mixed use projects. And that combination of the economic part in part one and the requirement for commercial in the general plan and zoning designations would ensure that 100% commercial projects are actually not allowed on these sites. So we think, in other words, this strikes the right balance and compromise while providing the housing element sites with their residential capacities while also preserving commercial use that's important to the decision makers and to the community. What we're hoping for is concurrence on this approach or further guidance on policy approaches and responses. Then the remaining items for discussion tonight relate to sites. The first is comment B.3.1. And this is the comment that essentially relates to an overall restructuring of the sites list that's in the housing element. And we'll go through what some of the key changes were. But first, we want to demonstrate that given the city's 1,892 units of regional housing needs allocation, or RHNA, that we must plan for in the next 8 years, a number of tough decisions and perhaps changes in the past planning practice in Pacifica will be necessary to accommodate those units. The staff, with community and decision maker input, has tried to reflect a number of community values like preserving hillsides and open space areas, prioritizing redevelopment of shopping centers, and creating walkable infill development opportunities as some of the key priorities that we've heard through a number of community engagement processes over the last several years. What we have put together in response to that feedback and our obligations is a distributed sites inventory throughout the city. No concentrations in our assessment in any particular area of Pacifica. We've created a sites list with 24 core RHNA sites and 10 surplus or buffer sites. And this is the first key restructuring of the sites list from what the decision makers would have seen and the community would have seen in the draft housing element that was released. That housing sites list that was previously released included a combined sites list with all of the potential housing sites with existing or rezoning capacity. What we've put together here in response to comment from HCD, they want to see the specific sites that are identified specifically to meet the regional housing needs allocation. And then anything above and beyond that can be deemed a surplus or buffer site. And so we've created 24 core RHNA sites, 10 surplus slash buffer sites. And that reflects existing capacity based on the 2040 general plan of 121 units, a little under 3% of the lower income RHNA, for example. And then a rezoning required of over 1,500 units, which is more than 3/4 of the lower income RHNA. So in other words, a very significant rezoning program is required, in part to meet the city's lower income housing obligations. This table here summarizes some of the key figures. Across the top row, you'll see in each column the income level, so lower income, moderate income, above moderate, and then the total number of units in each category. So as mentioned, our total RHNA is roughly 1,900 units. The core RHNA would be comprised of 2,061 units. It's a little bit difficult to drill in with such precision to just hit 1,892 units. So we're a little over the RHNA. Good news is those can count towards the buffer units, which we've indicated in the footnote here. And then we have surplus sites of a little more than 500 units. And what that does in total is give us an overall buffer of 37% of our RHNA, so a very healthy buffer at this point in time. And something that the staff continues to be very proud of is a significant buffer of 47% in our lower income levels. Continuing on with modifications to the sites list from the prior draft, we've added one new site to the core RHNA. We call it Site G. It's the Skyline water tank site. And then we've added 6 new sites in the surplus buffer category, A, B, F, D, E, and H, various locations throughout the city. We've further shifted 8 sites to the pipeline list based on comments from HCD. These are sites that we don't have to further justify or quantify in terms of their development potential, but given that they're already somewhere in the development pipeline, HCD suggested we shift the category and minimize some of the analytical work we have to do. We removed one city-owned site, Site 7 at Talbot and Goodman. After further analysis, it just wasn't a good site on its own as a standalone, and so we've proposed that for removal. And then we removed 2 sites in the information presented tonight in the presentation and in the staff report based on the direction given on September 25th to remove Site 26, which was the Caltrans Quarry site, and Site 36, which is the Seabowl site. So that concludes the overall restructuring and repackaging of the sites list in the housing element. I'll shift next to another sites-related policy comment from the HCD comment letter. This is comment B.3.2.B, and it relates to Assembly Bill AB 2011. That's a law passed in 2022 that would designate certain properties along commercial corridors with large roadway systems to be allowed to develop at up to 60 dwelling units per acre ministerially or by right. In other words, no further zoning or discretionary action required to authorize development at those densities. We had built our sites list in the first housing element draft on those assumptions of AB 2011 density of 60 dwelling units per acre for those sites. However, a comment came back from HCD asking us for further analysis that the sites would actually develop based on the criteria and requirements of AB 2011. Given the lack of a track record for a law that's so new and a lack of historical development pattern in Pacifica of up to 60 dwelling units per acre, we don't feel like we can provide the analysis that HCD has required. But those sites and the densities that they would generate were very critical to the overall site's strategy and approach. And so what we've discussed with HCD and we're proposing in this revision is to have the city council rezone those sites that were assumed at 60 dwelling units per acre to that 60 dwelling unit per acre density. And what the slide here shows is the breakdown of those sites between the core arena and the surplus sites, give or take 300 units in the core arena and give or take 260 units in the surplus sites. And what the tables on the right show is if the council and commission were uncomfortable with that rezoning to that density, what the planning challenge would be based on alternative densities for those sites to reallocate those units. And so it's anywhere from 50 units from the core arena at 50 units per acre to over 150 units that would need to be reallocated to other locations if the council wanted to push all of those sites down to 30 units per acre. So staff is seeking concurrence to do the rezoning. It was assumed in the initial sites approach in the prior element. So we're hoping we can just sort of change the process to arrive at the density rather than rejiggering the entire housing element sites lists to come up with alternative densities for those sites. Here we can see more detail on where those particular sites are. Sites 10, 18, 27, and 32 in the core arena, and sites 12 and 34 in the buffer. And you can see they're oriented along the Highway 1 corridor, which qualifies for the AB 2011 densities. And the sites circled in orange are core arena, and the sites circled in green are buffer, just showing some of the clustering up in the Pacific Manor neighborhood, Rockaway Beach area, and Lindemar area. And then the last sites-related comments to work through. The City Council and Commission made some significant progress on this at the last study session, but bringing it up here for further discussion and concurrence, it relates to an infrastructure capacity constraint that our analysis has identified at the Rockaway Beach pump station. This relates to sewer transmission capacity through the sewer mains, through the pump station, ultimately to the Clara Creek water recycling plant in the Rockaway Beach / quarry area. One of the key requirements during the housing element process for the city is to identify potential constraints to housing development. That can be land use regulations and densities that are not sufficient to construct the housing. It can be onerous or excessive fees that cause financial burdens, or it can be infrastructure constraints, potentially roadways, water availability, or in this instance, sewer capacity constraints. So this is the significant infrastructure-related capacity constraint that our analysis has come up with. And you can see bounded in that bold red line, the approximate boundary of what's called the catchment area, or in other words, all of the area that drains to that Rockaway Beach sewer pump station. And so what we've had to do as a result is go from over 700 units of proposed capacity in the first draft of the housing element to roughly 180 units of proposed capacity in the revised approach. What we were concerned about in light of HCD's comment about further analysis of the infrastructure capacity constraint was the ability to demonstrate how we would overcome that without having to remove all of the units from the catchment area. There are some key sites here that are very good in terms of other criteria for ranking and scoring the sites for their viability. And to remove them entirely would cause hundreds of units to have to be programmed or planned elsewhere in town. And so trying to keep with that equitable distribution I talked about in one of the earliest slides, our approach to addressing this infrastructure capacity constraint was twofold. As mentioned, cut the number of units from the core RENA that we need to analyze most specifically for infrastructure constraints down to less than 200 in this catchment area, and then combine that with identified, already planned capital improvements that the city will undertake, which in this case includes sewer main replacements in the Valley Mar and Rockaway Beach neighborhoods. And so the key outcome here related to this capacity issue is not that there's day-to-day 24/7, 365 capacity constraints through that pump station. It's a wet weather phenomenon where, due to the age and condition of the city's wastewater system, stormwater from rain events, inflow and infiltration, called I&I, makes its way into the sewer system and then exceeds the design capacity for the infrastructure. So these the Valley Mar and Rockaway Beach sewer main replacements will reduce the amount of I&I by replacing those pipes and sealing them up so that the stormwater does not infiltrate at the same rate. And so the effect of that is, in turn, it artificially creates new capacity, if you will. So the rainwater won't cause the system to exceed capacity in the same manner as before. So the reduced units combined with the created capacity or the reduction of I&I from the sewer main replacements, we've confirmed with our consultant that the wastewater sewer consultant, that it will create enough capacity based on the projected I&I reduction to allow at least the core RENA sites that have been identified, so we can demonstrate to HCD that for purposes of meeting the RENA, there is not an effective infrastructure constraint during the 8-year period once those sewer main replacement projects are undertaken. We do have other sites proposed in the buffer or surplus sites in this catchment area, but seeing as they're not core RENA sites, we can continue to evaluate those infrastructure capacity constraints at the project level if and when those projects come in, and through conditions of approval, general plan compliance, as well as the California Environmental Quality Act or CEQA process, analyze what those specific constraints are at that point in time, and then determine what mitigations those projects might be able to incorporate. But for the core RENA, we need to analyze and do what we can at the city level proactively to determine whether there's a constraint there and to eliminate it if there is. And so, again, just a different graphic here showing the specific sites in that general Rockaway Beach pump station catchment area. So that concludes the overview of the one follow-up item from September 25th, and then the additional sites-related discussion points detailed in the staff report that we hope the council and commission can delve into in greater detail tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Once again, always a bit amazed by the amount of work that goes into this. I did not point out earlier that Jack Burgett with the Water District Board, the president of the Water District Board, is present, and I wanted to acknowledge his presence. Thank you for being here. Christian, if you take a moment and introduce, please, all the staff and consultants who are here with us tonight also working on this, I'd appreciate that.
Absolutely, Mayor. So to my immediate right, we have Karen Murphy from the City Attorney's Office, who has been lead attorney helping with this planning matter. To her right, we have Sandy Council, who is with Good City Company. She brings extensive experience from her career in local government to housing-related policies and programs, and has really helped us focusing on the sites component of the housing element process. You, of course, know Assistant City Manager Yulia Carter. At the end, we have Aaron Acknan, principal of Good City Company, also extensive local government career and experience, providing overall assistance in project management and advice with the process. We have Carol, why am I blanking on your last name? Johnson, forgive me, from Good City Company, extensive career in local government planning as well. We have Brianne Harkusha, senior planner on the city staff, helping as well to supplement my work at the city staff level, and Sabina Mora on the end, who's been primarily focusing on our affirmatively furthering fair housing analysis. And then I think we may have Nick Hamilton, who was here in person last time from Good City Company, joining via Zoom in case we need to have him chime in as well.
Thank you so much. I appreciate being reminded who is here and working on this. Council and Commission. I think hands will be the most efficient way to See who has questions at any given moment in time. Councilmember Bowles?
Yeah, I just have a few to start. I'm still trying to understand the map and all the different colors and circles and so forth. And so I appreciate the sites that are circled in black. You responded to me that those have the lower income capacity. Can you tell me what the sites that have the white letters? What does the white letter represent?
So the white lettering, I think, is used to distinguish primarily the sites bolded with the black outline, which are the designated lower income capacity sites. Sandy, feel free to expand on the explanation if necessary.
That's my understanding.
That's my understanding.
Yeah, what I'm not clear about is if in all instances, only the lower income sites have the white lettering. I think it may be used where the dark blue is there. So it's probably not the best method to find all of those sites. Really, it's the bold outline of the parcel boundary that will indicate that legend of sites with lower income capacity.
Okay.
And then they also have the black lettering, whereas the other sites have the white lettering.
Yeah, I think they're maybe a mix.
Was there a mix?
Yeah, I guess I understand the black. I'm still not sure why. Maybe they're all that way, and I'm just not reading it properly. So anything that is not circled black would have white numbers. Maybe that's what I'm seeing. So those are not low-income sites, okay.
I believe that's the case, yes.
Okay,
So the black
okay,
letters
okay,
are
thank
sites
you.
with the
I'm a little
lower
slow
income
on that.
lower income designation.
And then, so for example, Site 33, which is the U.S. Bank site, that is all above moderate, and the 14 units, I mean, if they actually built 14 units, some of those would need to be affordable, right, as part of our inclusionary ordinance. So is there a reason that we're not including a few as lower income on that site?
Yes, it's a great question. Sandy, I think, will provide a more detailed explanation, but essentially for purposes of planning for our lower income levels in the RENA, HCD discourages the use of below market rate inclusionary zoning. And very often, and certainly it's the case with the sites as we've analyzed them in our sites list, they're not suitable to be lower income sites in their entirety. So we have to demonstrate sufficient capacity for lower income based off the various site parameters like half an acre minimum size, minimum 30 dwelling unit per acre density, et cetera. So sure, we could pick up, bits and pieces here and there that might ultimately count towards lower income housing that's approved and built. But for purposes of demonstrating accommodating the RENA for planning purposes, we're not relying on those in the sites list. And so that reflects what you're seeing.
Okay, but we can certainly ask for certain percentage if a project comes through that would be.
That's right.
Absolute. Is this on? Just to remember that this sites list is a study in the capacity and the suitability for each income. It's not dictating that that's what will happen.
Right. Okay.
So if you want to think of it another way, every time any project comes in, you're going to get a little low income and mod, and so that actually adds to our buffer a little bit. That just gives us a little edge. But for simplicity of calculating the three categories, the simplest way and the way that the state generally likes to see it is you just put each category for each site.
Gotcha, okay.
And importantly, we can count them towards our annual progress report. So inclusionary zoning or BMR units that come out of the 15% required share, those may in some years be many, if not most, of the below market rate or lower income units that are produced. And so we can, again, count them towards our production and satisfaction of the RENA on the production and approval side.
Okay, and sorry, two more questions. So for AB 211 projects, if there are some that are in the pipeline but that aren't on your specific list, would the AB 211 bonuses still apply, even though they're not specifically listed? And/or if we get an application that's not, on either list yet, the AB 211 bonuses would apply, I assume, but.
So if I understand the question, a project that would otherwise qualify under AB 2011 can absolutely propose their project to construct pursuant to those allowances, notably up to 60 dwelling units per acre. And we could count all of those units in our production figures each year in our report. What we're asking here is that for purposes of demonstrating the RENA and complying with our obligations and passing HCD's review, to just do the rezoning now that would otherwise be assumed to the density of 60 dwelling units per acre under AB 2011, so we can satisfy HCD's comment.
Okay, so I don't know if there are any pipeline projects already that are in that area. Are we rezoning those then also, if need be?
So there are potentially other sites than were initially proposed that could qualify for AB 2011, but we also put them through the filter, right, of the community values we've heard in the planning process, and so we tried to pick AB 2011 sites that would otherwise be good housing element sites, for lack of a more technical term, relative to the planning priorities that our community has provided to us. So there could be other sites not on the list that could qualify for AB 2011, but we haven't received any AB 2011 applications to date.
And does 2011, does it have to back directly onto Highway 1, or, is a certain distance okay?
The site needs to be on the street that qualifies, which.
Fronting the roadway.
Fronting the roadway, yes.
Okay.
Which would either be the highway or some other major streets.
Okay. Sorry, and then just one more about infrastructure. So again, thinking of that area between Rockaway and Valleymar, what about the projects that we've already approved that are under construction? Are, for example, 801 Fassler, are those units in that total 180, or do we have extra capacity beyond that?
They're not included in the housing element, given we've already counted them towards a prior housing element period in the annual report.
But is there an infrastructure issue is what I'm asking.
Sure. We have accepted those as part of the baseline. To my knowledge, the sewer system master plan included all of those previously approved pipeline type projects in its estimations. So the capacity issue that we're referring to the best of my knowledge, acknowledges everything that the city had approved or expected to be imminently approved through, I think, the 2021 date in the analysis in that report.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else have questions?
Briefly, if you could direct me, please, I'm looking at packet page 792, and I've been kind of flipping back and forth between the various tables. I'm looking specifically at the RENA capacity analysis table on packet page 792, and the first line, the second line on that table says pipeline, and I'm wondering if you could point me to an inventory of what is included in that pipeline.
The quick and simple answer is we have the list. We haven't reproduced it publicly. That will go into the next updated draft that's released to the public. Given a moment, I could probably rattle off, many of those sites.
It's
It's in your October version. But we haven't prepared them specific for tonight's presentation.
I understand. So at some point, I would appreciate having that, because I need to coalesce it all together in one picture for myself. So thank you. I'm sure you all have it in your front of your house. I don't.
Yes, Commissioner Devine.
So with these sites along Highway 1, you're saying they need to be really, right up at the frontage road. Does that include the setbacks in the design standards that the Planning Commission has established?
I don't know that I can identify each site that was an AB 2011 site that we've also gone through a focused objective development standards discussion of. I can try to
Just generally
Construct that.
speaking, I guess my curiosity is, as projects get proposed for this corridor, and we want to attempt to qualify, will our design standards be included in that qualification, or will they sort of be pushed to the side in the need to qualify? I'm trying to generally understand it.
Sure. So I guess I would answer your question by saying, if you're interested in retaining as much control as you can, doing the rezoning we've proposed is the better way to do that. If a project qualifies under AB 2011, they'll be able to avail themselves of the allowances of that state law and not necessarily be required to comply with all of the local zoning provisions. So there are other hoops they need to jump through under AB 2011 that a developer, given both options, may choose to do the local process, in which case we would retain a greater amount of local control, not absolute, given all of the admonitions I've given you through our various meetings about density bonus and other ways to perhaps evade local zoning and general plan regulations, but the maximum amount of control that the city can preserve would be preserved by doing the proposed rezoning rather than an AB 2011 project if one were to qualify.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Commissioner.
Mayor.
Oh, yes.
go ahead.
Oh, okay, is it for me to go ahead?
Yes, and thank you for reminding me you're there. I did not see your face, and so it's hard for me to
Okay,
recall.
here's my face.
It's a
Hello.
good face. It's good to see it.
Good to see you too. I just have a process question on the staff report on page 2, packet page 5. It says the update from September 25th, and it talks about us removing site 26 and site 36, which is the Seabowl. And I'm curious if it is still possible for us to have a discussion about the Seabowl site, considering the public comments that we received.
Yes,
Thanks.
no problem. Commissioner Wright?
Yes, a couple of questions. I know that a lot of the community is very concerned about traffic, particularly along Route 1 and at the Valimar Light, and I would appreciate it if staff could speak to how they've been over backwards in putting this whole package together to try to take that into consideration to address the community's concern about that issue.
Thank you, Commissioner Wright. What I will start by saying is that we are well aware of the traffic issues that are experienced on Highway 1 through that Fassler and Reina Del Mar corridor. And that line of thinking would weigh in favor of trying to put all of these new housing element sites north of that location to try to minimize new vehicle trips through the center part of town that fairly will have the potential to contribute to increased congestion at some point in time. However, there are other requirements of the housing element process that make it, in my opinion, impractical, if not impossible, to do that type of concentration, not least of which is our obligation to avoid overconcentration of lower income units and to encourage opportunities to locate lower income and moderate income housing in areas of high opportunity, which do include areas in the central and southern parts of our community. And so we would run afoul of other imperatives in state law in the HCD review process if we were to try to push all of these units to the northern part of town, which incidentally is an area that has some of the greatest indicators for disadvantaged residents, disabled residents, in areas where additional housing opportunities for people in those communities are needed. And so we don't have the ability to just move all of the housing units north of Reina Del Mar Avenue to avoid potential traffic concerns. And the sites list that we've prepared reflects that balancing act.
Thank you. Additionally, in the first part, you had suggested that you were trying a different approach and a number of other considerations to resubmit, and I'm assuming you did that with the help of all our consultants. Do they have past experience in this new approach that we're going to use for our submittal, and is that typically successful?
Commissioner Wright, are you referring to the 100% non-residential policy?
Yes.
Sure. I don't know if anyone on Good City wants to address that.
I'll use this to be easier. Good evening, Commissioner. So I would say everything this round is a new experience with HCD because some of their comments change as the rounds change. But in general, I think the more you could point to developments that have actually happened, both here in Pacifica as well as in kind of the North Peninsula area, and there have been mixed-use developments that have been approved and developed and that are making money now and are actually out there from a market standpoint, the more successful you will be. So I think our approach at pointing at the fact that, hey, developments have happened and we're increasing density, which increases the market incentive to build, will be a successful approach overall. Now, that's not to say that HCD will come back and want more information and more data, but I generally think that this will be a successful approach.
Thank you. And then you were adding a site. There was a Skyline tank site. I was wondering what feedback you had from the owner of that property?
Right. I believe you're referring to Site G. That site, in my recollection, is owned by the state of California. We haven't had specific conversations with them about this site at this point in time, but what I can say is there has been direction given, including governor's executive orders and so forth, looking to maximize opportunities for housing development on excess state land. So there is a precedent for having those kinds of conversations with the state, which we will absolutely do if this ends up in the sites list to really push forward on aligning a project to be undertaken there.
And the last thing I guess I want to say is thank you. I mean, it hasn't been that long since we were here discussing this. It seems like you've put a tremendous amount of work in this, both from a consultant and staff perspective, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Witt.
Sorry, I have one more. So I was asking earlier today and got a response about the work the Planning Commission had done on objective design standards and when that would be incorporated. And so the response I got was that the Phase 1 rezoning, it would be part of the Phase 1 rezoning. So can you confirm when that happens? Is that in January before we, finalize the final version with the EIR and so forth, or is that after that?
So there, I guess, are a couple parts to that explanation. So one is that there was an attempt with some of the figures in Appendix F of the draft housing element to at least include some polygons around some of the sites to identify the sub-areas of those bigger parcels that are intended to be the housing element sites. And we may have an opportunity to add more of those polygons to the initial draft housing element adoption. What the Phase 1 rezoning is intended to do is to follow along with immediately following the housing element adoption to incorporate the required rezonings to accommodate the RHNA. And the theory in the process has been to try to front load 6 key objective development standards in that Phase 1 rezoning. So at least there's a basic framework for development were to come in between that completion of the Phase 1 rezoning and the much longer, extensive Phase 2 objective standards development process, which, to be fair, is going to take probably a year or more to work through in the type of detail that's needed to have a successful process. So I don't think it's likely to be the case that we'll get those 6 objective development standards in the housing element adoption, but they hopefully will be part of the Phase 1 rezoning. But that's still a work in progress, and the 3 meetings the Planning Commission has had thus far have not completed that work, even for 6 basic objective development standards. We've taken essentially, here are all of the good ideas we have type of input. we have yet to be able to synthesize that as staff and bring back the realities of all of that input and the give and take or the compromises that might be needed, because ultimately those need to allow the density identified in the housing element sites list to be constructed. So if heights are too low or setbacks are too substantial, it may be that we cannot clearly demonstrate that the sites can accommodate that density, and we need to change those objective development standards. So it's still a work in progress.
Okay, so just thinking back to the question about percent commercial, I guess, and because that is something we're saying we want on certain of these sites, but because we're not giving any numbers now, I mean, they could do 100 square foot commercial and that would satisfy, what we're asking for in the housing element that we're submitting until those objective design standards get further fleshed out?
That could be the case. That interim period between housing element adoption and phase 1 rezoning, that is a risk. And there's not a good practical way to head that off, unfortunately.
Okay.
Chair Hauser?
I just want to clarify something. Are we going to go through each item one by one? Because if so, I'll ask a general question, but if we're just kind of lumping through all of them, I have specific ones as well.
Right. To me, that's a question for the mayor. We're prepared to work through efficiently, slide by slide, comment by comment, if that's the mayor's prerogative.
Okay, then I just have a very general question that I thought that I understood, but then listening to everything, I'm realizing that I might not know the answer to this. All of the sites on the housing element that are in the core got rezoned. I thought all of the buffer sites also got rezoned. Is that incorrect?
No, a significant share of the buffer sites also require rezoning.
So any site that's on the list, that comports with my understanding. So any site that's on the list, core or buffer, will get rezoned with the phase 1 rezoning.
That's mostly true. There are very few sites that meet all of the various criteria that we need that
Or
also
are
have
already
existing
zoned.
capacity.
Right.
There are a few. I don't know if Sandy has the number of sites, but it's the great minority.
That still answers
Yes.
my question.
Okay.
The question was like, do the buffer sites tail? And the answer is no.
No, they are in the rezoning package for the phase 1 rezoning and will be indicated as such.
General question I have.
Okay, did you have any, so I figure we'll go through one by one when we get to deliberation. Did you have any specific questions you wanted to get to at this time?
Maybe. I'll save it for deliberation. I'm okay.
Yeah, please.
Just one more question, quick. I'm noticing a lot of literature from other cities about local hiring policies. Is that something we're going to get into later, or is that something I can ask about right now?
At this point, I don't believe there's anything in the housing element on local hire policies or that would impact the sites. So that may be an issue for further discussion unless I'm.
All of these cities, they all have one thing in common, which is the local hiring, so I figured it was relevant to this meeting.
So it may be a relevant policy discussion. I think what I want to communicate is we have structured the study session tonight to be policy direction on responses to HCD comments.
Okay.
Since local hire was not in the previous draft, there's no comment from HCD on it. If there's a desire to have this policy discussion, I would ask that we try to do it in a different setting so we can prepare, analyze, and offer options if there are any for the commission and council.
Understood? Thank you.
Yeah, Chair?
Sorry, I had one more question. One of the items that we were given tonight was a request from the community to add an additional site, but I don't think that the CEQA report that, are we past the point where we can do that because the CEQA report is underway?
No, in response to HCD's comments, we've had to pause the EIR process for the phase 1 rezonings. And so there is an opportunity to add sites potentially or to modify the sites list. Given the relatively meaningful changes that HCD asked for that would affect densities as well as seeking confirmation from the decision makers about ongoing inclusion of certain sites, we've had to hold off on that work. So it's not, the ship hasn't sailed, for lack of a
And it
better
doesn't
term.
re-trigger like a new, it doesn't set us back from being paused.
Not any more than we're already set back on account of
Okay,
HCD's
got it,
comments.
got it. Thank you.
If I may.
Sure. Commissioner Wright will be next.
Just really quick, following on, can I please know where this came from? City Clerk, this document that we have in front of us?
The document was provided by one of the folks that submitted a yellow card for public comment
I
tonight.
was expecting it was maybe from a public comment.
I think that's where I was going, where it
Got
was a
you.
stack of those cities, and they all had one policy in common. And I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, where's this going?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Wright.
My question is, I noticed in the agenda that public comment is absolutely last, and considering how late we're likely to run tonight, I'm wondering if you might want to reconsider that.
So certainly, and I wasn't necessarily I wasn't sure yet what I was going to do with public comment, but I do want to make sure that the questions have gotten out of the way before I go to public comment, at least to the satisfaction of the panel before we move on. Mary, are you good? Okay. So not seeing any questions at this time, let's bring it to public comment. I have 3 cards in front of me currently. Kirk Miller, Jamie Vasquez, and Ken Miles. Before we get to that, I should probably read this one more time. That public meetings are a limited public forum, meaning that there are rules for commenting at these meetings. Comments on this agenda must address the housing element. If comments do not address the housing element, I will provide you with an initial warning to stay on topic. If the warning is not followed, I will direct the city clerk to cut off the microphone, and throughout this warning system, I will seek the assistance of city attorney in identifying comments not related to the agenda item. Mr. Miller.
Filter.
Honorable Mayor, City Councilors, Madam Chair of the Planning Commission, Commissioners. My name is Kirk Miller. I'm an architect, planner, project manager for Rockaway Highlands, which is just north of the Lutheran Church between Fassler and Rena Del Mar. I last spoke to you at your March public session, joint session, and as a result of that, thank you very much for putting our site, or at least a portion of our site, on the core. Is site number 38, and hopefully you have a handout in front of you, the first page of which shows those sites. I'd like to bring you up to speed on where we are on that, and this is before all this came about with regard to catchment area and low-income housing and things of that nature. But if you would mind looking at the last sheet you have, which is an 8.5 on 11 by 17 site plan. This is what I call a concept plus. And the site that is site 38 is where you, in the upper left-hand corner, we see 2 buildings. That is on core site 38. I'd like to see the one on the right-hand side, which is by the same property owner, which is zoned R1 as opposed to our lower site, which is mixed-use residential. And at the bottom, you see the Lutheran Church, and where you see that building, which I'm in discussions with, been discussing with them for the last year, and they're very, very interested in doing some development or working with us to do some development. That is zoned for high-density residential. So these last 2 sites are not in the housing element, which we would like to see and our clients would like to see. Notice also that in the center of the site, going from left to right, is the access road off of Highway 1 that is shared by us and the church. So this will probably come down as a joint venture agreement. Having said that, I noticed that Site 38 is now being zoned for 100% low income. My clients, unfortunately, are not in a position to do that. Our goal, however, with the site as a whole, is to have 1/3 of our units be affordable. But I'm not sure how they can do 100% affordable. The catchment area is a whole other matter. I just got educated today on how that comes about. And we have a water retention pond, of course, but that's not to mitigate the concerns. But having said that, we're looking at potentially putting on 180 units on the site as a whole. It's an ideal site for high density because it's a mini valley that has no impact on neighbors, no traffic through neighborhoods, no view blockage. And you notice on Highway 1, at the input I've received, is that we have a turnout.
Sorry, sir, that is your time.
Okay,
You're welcome to email us comments further.
say again?
You're welcome to email us further comments. We'll be
thank you.
happy to read them. Thank you so much. Jamie Vasquez?
Good evening, City Council and Mayor Big Stick and Planning Commission. First, I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak today.
Please pull your microphone closer. Thank you so much.
Can you hear me? All right. So like I said, good evening, City Council, Mayor Big Stick, and Planning Commission. First, I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak today. My name is Jaime Vasquez. I'm a field representative from the NorCal Carpenters, from Local 217 that covers the city of San Mateo. And as you were talking about the papers that you guys were reviewing, I was the one that submitted them earlier. And so I'm here today just to speak about implementing labor standards in the housing element. Labor standards like having state certified apprenticeship, local hire, and having a health care for people that work in and day out every day in the field. Increasing resources for labor compliance and providing livable wages. And I'm here today just hoping you guys can implement it, encouraging language. So most of those papers are other cities that already implemented it, such as Menlo Park, Daly City, Foster City, Redwood City, and San Mateo County. And if Pacifica will look into it and hopefully be on the same page as other cities have done so already. And that's my comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vasquez. Ken Miles, followed by Sue Degree. Those are the last two cards I currently have. If anyone else wishes to speak, please fill out a card in the back and have it brought up.
Thank you.
Mr.
Member-
Miles, before you begin, I noticed you did put in a second card for general public comment, which we are not having tonight because specifically we're only discussing housing element. So I just wanted to give you that heads up. You're welcome to send us any email information or if somehow it incorporates into your other comments.
Thank you. Thank you for allowing me to speak tonight before distinguished members of the council and the Planning Commission. There's some things that I would like to clarify. Some of it is that there's several large parcels that are in Pacifica, one at the north end and two at the north end and one at the south end. The Calson properties and the Fish in a Bowl, how come they're not included? They would be excellent places to be considered in this mix of housing. Because I noticed that most of the things are all centered along the highway pretty much, and then along Lindenmar Boulevard. And then two high schools, Terra Nova and Oceana, sites 21, 22. I've been at a couple of the public gatherings that we talked about all this, and when it came up to Oceana, and it might be the same for Terra Nova, the public members of these discussions really didn't want to have dense cars and things around their house and around their homes and residential areas. And besides that, we may need those sites for when you have more people in Pacifica, we're going to have more kids. And we should be able to consider that for housing, maybe some housing, but parks as well, and school things. Along Highway 1, most of the concentration is for things that you plan to build with all these people. And I think that should be reserved for visitor serving mostly. We have a lot of people come here, residential. A lot of people would want to use commercial sites like restaurants and dining, viewing the beautiful ocean, etc. And then the quarry has two sites, 26 and 34. Those are right in the area of archaeological Ohlone Village. And I hope you have an archaeologist there when you plan to dig up the ground, because they have found human remains as well as artifacts. Secondly, what you're missing out on is back in the 1980s, the Planning Commission merged many, many lots in Pacifica. These were R1 lots. And the people had very little discourse in talking about it or trying to stop it. And many of these lots are still undeveloped, and they're here in Valleymar, Pedro Point, Sharp Park, and Rockaway, mostly. And if you want some information on that, I'd be willing to share that with you about these specific sites. And that could probably bring you a couple hundred additional sites that you can consider for housing. Other than that, keep up the good work. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sue Degree, and that's my
Good
final
evening. I really appreciate everybody willing to work. So just a little bit of track record. So our community is a very active community. We are vocal on just about everything. And you saw from the last meeting we had here when we were told we only had 1 minute to speak and that maybe we're taking away Zoom inclusion, how many people came out of the woodwork that we've never seen before, who pushed for the right of the public to speak up. So our track record in Pacifica, I don't think is known by a lot of people sitting there, and maybe for some of you. We have been very, very active for affordable, truly affordable housing. And what was the pushback? It was developers, pretty much. We tried very hard. So I was on council from 2002 to 2018. That's a lot of years for pushback. Now we find out that we get a developer's remedy. You know, I want to throw up. Seriously, I feel like the Grim Reaper has come here and that electeds from on high don't know us. And I guess what pushed me over the edge recently was hearing Senator Wiener go on and on against coastal cities. Well, the Coastal Act, which I was not here, I was a Baysider, poor person, wanted my access like everybody else. We worked hard for the Coastal Act. Sharp Park, for example, was supposed to be affordable, kept that way. Somewhere in 83, I found out like a month ago, that somewhere in 83, somebody from on high decided that that was no longer a rule. So there's the Grim Reaper specter here. It's like I would have liked to see a little bit more pushback for the voter. What's the point if you're supposed to have a government of, by, and for, and all of a sudden the by and of is on the side, and somebody else who's even elected is telling us how we should think and what we should do. We have mandates. We're under a specter. This is really extremely annoying, especially when our track record has been for truly affordable. And in the more recent years, this community is no longer truly affordable. It's $1 million houses, so that brings me back to perpetuity. When you're talking about affordables, I want to hear, where's the assurance that those things are going to have a priority, that they're not just in the pipeline so we can say we're following the mandates, that these are possibilities if. I have a feeling we're going to have $1 million houses, and those affordables, like the past, when we did try, you have puny little numbers of going forth on low and so forth. And we're pushing for all, and all of a sudden, all is no longer those people who had to struggle. Just like in 83, you took away the whole Sharp Park Coastal Act, and now the Coastal Act is supposed to be the big bag boogeyman. Well, the specter of the Grim Reaper isn't the Coastal Act. I'm really concerned. Are there going to be assurances that truly affordable are going to be built? Or are there going to be millions all over the place and 3 affordables? So, I hate to be irritated, but hearing Senator Wiener go on about how bad the coastal cities are, when we have a track record, sorry.
Thank you, Sue. Emily? Sorry, Sarah. I am not used to you sitting in that chair, for the record.
I have a hand raised on Zoom by Remy Tan, and then R. Connell. Remy Tan, I'm allowing you to unmute.
Remy, please go ahead and state your name for the record. We'll let you know when you have a minute remaining.
Hi, again, Remy Tan, architect and resident Pacific Manor. Thank you, Honorable City Council and Planning Commission. I really appreciate the hard work that everybody's doing on this, and I'm glad to see that the commercial sites are all being zoned or planned to be zoned as mixed use. Agree with the consultants and everybody who's spoken that this is like really important. That's the current state of the art as far as city and urban planning for mixed use, and mixed use projects have been the most successful in infill urban environments. So again, real glad to hear that. To address the concern, I think one of the council members and commissioners had about losing commercial, I believe we, in the second phase, make sure that all of the ground floor of that mixed use is commercial. That typically alleviates the issue as second and third floors don't work very well for retail at all. They all want to be on the ground floor. The other thing that I'd like to point out is we do need to keep in mind of the potential development sites with good views for hotels, as you know, that's one of our leading transit occupancy tax. And with the city's, brand new convention center, it's a known problem not having enough hotel rooms serving that. And Pacifica, given its proximity to the city, it really makes an ideal spot for, hotel construction, given that and, our beautiful ocean views. So it's, we don't want to make sure we lose capacity in the transit occupancy taxes. So I would, urge the
1 minute.
council commission and the city planning department to really look at the sites and make sure that we're not, again, losing any potential hotel sites. And regarding the traffic problems, again, we've got to work with Caltrans to figure out the, lights and maybe change those into traffic circles to increase the capacity in Highway 1. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And who was next, Sarah?
Next, we have R. Connell, and that's the last hand that I have raised on Zoom. R. Connell, please state your name and begin your comment once you unmute.
Rob Connolly. R. Connell didn't fit in, or Robert Connolly didn't fit in the Zoom name. Good evening, Mayor Big Stick, Chair Hauser, and members of the Council and Commission. My name's Rob Connolly. I'm representing Toll Brothers tonight in Nick Costle's absence. As you may know, my company submitted a pre-application to the city last month for a residential project at the former Siebel site. That pre-application calls for 117 market rate and below market rate homes. We've already begun the engineering and architecture work to design a shovel-ready project as soon as we have our approvals from the city. In addition to bringing much needed market rate and below market rate housing to Pacifica, we certainly anticipate and have stated on multiple occasions that we want to help make up for the loss of recreational use that the former Siebel offered to the community. Already, there have been several great ideas suggested that we're more than willing to contribute to financially. We've invested heavily into this incredible city and want to give back to Pacifica as much as we can. We'll also be sure to take care of our good friend and neighbor, the Pacifica Brewery. We've committed to build the brewery many improvements, and our project will bring significant future business to help them thrive. So I sincerely ask you to reconsider your position and put the Siebel site back in the housing element as a residential use with the density potential up to 30 dwelling units per acre. Thank you for your time and consideration of this matter.
Thank you, Mr. Connolly. Sarah, are there anyone else with raised hands?
No further hands raised.
Last chance for anyone in the audience. And if not, we will close public comment and bring it back for further questions and deliberation. Just very briefly to former Mayor DeGree's point, I would certainly urge our very active and engaged community to send copious numbers of ideas to our representatives, State Senator Josh Becker and Assemblymember Mark Berman. Frankly, both have expressed frustrations that they're having trouble with their colleagues trying to find solutions that might be beneficial to us locally, and I think they would welcome any suggestions that might help them further that conversation in Sacramento. And those are my comments on that for now. Does anybody have any questions they'd like to raise, or if anyone wants to start straight into deliberation, we could probably take it item by item. Chair?
I have a question about one of the commenters who was speaking about the Rockaway Highlands project. Is this in the same sanitary sewer catchment area that we were looking at before?
Yes.
Okay. And sorry, you probably have it right in front of you, but how many sites are current, or how many units are currently on site 38?
How many sites or
Sorry, how many units?
how many units are on site 38?
Yeah,
Let me double check.
I'm sure I can find it too. Yeah, thank you, 61.
61.
Okay, okay, so it's a request for an increase in 119 units in the catchment area. And I guess my question for staff is, seeing that we can entertain adding new sites in the context of CEQA, is this counterproductive to what we talked about in light of policy B39?
So I think in general, it's probably best not to add more units to this catchment area for housing element purposes. If there was strong desire to add a particular site, I think the next best thing from my perspective would be to see, is there a corresponding site that could be removed or reduced in density? And then the last option in my mind would be to add it, but add it as a buffer surplus site, so that it's not a core arena site. But I guess the same swap thought process could apply to the core arena sites, but we wouldn't want to go over the 180 units we've analyzed for wastewater capacity in that catchment area at this time.
So I just have one more question on that, and it feeds back into the general question I asked before about like the buffer versus surplus. If we're rezoning all of them, and I hear you and understand that we might want to do that, but if we're rezoning all of them, what's the practical reason for why?
Yeah, I think in the first instance, it's showing HCD where the sites are that have gone through the most rigorous analysis for housing element, for accommodating the arena. And so if we had, additional sites that maybe don't meet all of the criteria as well, outside of infrastructure constraints as an example, but maybe a similar one we've talked previously about, additional analysis of some of the existing developed sites, like in terms of building age or site coverage, FAR. We don't have to, our perspective anyways is that we aren't going to be held to the same standard in our analytical review for those sites with HCD as we will be for the core arena sites.
But functionally, they're all rezoned to residential.
Functionally, they're all
So that a
rezoned.
developer who's interested, whether they're in the surplus or whether they're in the buffer or the core.
That's right. The outcome is going to be the same in terms of the rezoning process, but for purposes of complying with the housing element requirements and HCD certification, we're putting more analytical effort into the core arena sites.
Okay, thank you for that explanation.
Just as a follow-up to that, can you confirm the ownership of sites 10 and 11? Or I don't think any of those are Caltrans sites, or are they in private ownership?
Both of those sites are in private ownership.
Okay, so none of these really are probably that likely to develop to all lower income, including Site 38, as the architect suggested.
I mean, it's hard to say, but you might imagine the first priority from a private owner is a market rate project, but there are other reasons that property owners, sell to affordable housing developers.
And of the surplus sites, I'm assuming they're all in, I know 35 is, but Site 12 is now in private ownership also?
Correct.
34, okay.
Well, if there's no other immediate questions, perhaps we should start going through these items one by one. Coordinate with chair. Do you recommend we start straight into the sites, or do you want to go revisit the dangling participle from the last meeting?
Yeah, I think if I'm recalling correctly, we had B3.1 and B3.2B left. We had mostly discussed B3.9, but it sounded like staff was looking for a little more direction on that. And with the site we just talked about, that might be an appropriate place to incorporate that discussion. And then I think B3.2C was the last one. Is that an appropriate capturing of what's left?
Yeah, our hope tonight is, to, if we could, to start with the program comment, just to close that out, and then spend as much time as the council and commission needs on sites. So that's what's on the screen right now, confirming that guidance of the two-part, change in response. First part being showing all of the various mixed-use sites that have developed, and really the minority of projects in the recent past have been all commercial. So we have a number of good examples from our perspective to show where mixed-use development is actually occurring, even when 100% commercial projects would be allowable. And then supplementing that with the additional economic incentive given our market, where residential is more valuable than commercial in most cases, to say, not only was it doing that before, but you increased the density by an order of magnitude, all the more economic incentive to build mixed use where it's required or allowed. And then part two of that being ensuring the general plan and zoning require mixed use, not simply allow it. And then, unstated but seasoned in there in subsequent zoning efforts is to really try to refine those objective development standards, ensure the right amount of commercial in the right locations, trying to effectuate as much of that very detailed planning commission input that we've received so far, while also trying to balance, achieving the densities we need and so forth.
So, Sarah, if you're able to bring Mary's window into this screen so I can have a visual, that would be helpful. Not, okay. Thank you. And then, Chair, perhaps you and I can scan for initial questions, and if not, we can jump in.
Councilmember Bowles looks like she has a question.
Just with what's on the screen right now, when you say clarify that zoning designations for misuse will require commercial and residential. So there is still a commercial requirement. So people can't just build 100% residential in these sites.
They cannot. That's the revised proposal. Correct.
Okay. Great. Thank you.
Commissioner Ferguson.
I feel like I spoke most vitriolically on this one the last time, so I appreciate staff's efforts on this. This is exactly the compromise and concession I was looking for. The way that this is worded, I have no problem with it now, requiring neither 100% commercial nor residential, and still requiring the commercial component. So thank you for this concession work.
May I say?
Please.
Yeah, I'm going to kind of glom on to what Commissioner Ferguson said. This was really important. I mean, we talked about this for over an hour last time, and I feel like you guys really listened and came up with a very creative and thoughtful way of doing this, so I really appreciate it. One very quick clarifying question, I think I know the answer, but would the commercial, and there's a little bit of nuance to this, but I'm imagining that the commercial specifications that Planning Commission discussed would still potentially be guiding these, pending the discussion that you alluded to, Mr. Murdoch, about needing to take all of Planning Commission's feedback, analyze it, and see if we needed to make gives. Is that a fair?
That's right, and it's much less so in most cases the commercial feedback that was given than other objective development standard feedback that causes me concern about accomplishing the required densities. So, we will do all that we can to effectuate the commercial, feedback, for example, when crafting the development standards.
Thank you for solving this.
I really want to take a moment to echo the sentiments of our chair and Commissioner Ferguson. When I see the look of concern on your face, I start getting concerned. And to have that concern butting up against the clear concerns of our community is a tough place for us all to be in. So that you took the time to come back with a solution that we can apparently write off on, a big, big thank you. Any other comments or questions on this point before we move on?
I just want to thank our planning commissioners because I truly rely on you for your advice. That's your wheelhouse, and the careful deliberation that you undertake, both in these meetings and in all the other meetings that you have been involved in. The work that you've done is very much appreciated. Thank you.
All right, 1 down, 3 to go. Let's do this.
They'll all be that easy, I'm sure. So
Don't discourage me at this point.
So this next one, in simple terms, we don't really need any specific policy question answered. There were a lot of changes in response to HCD's comments, improvements, refinements, incorporating input from the decision makers. It's really a global question about the sites list and the types of sites and so forth. So we can, work through it or answer more questions about these specific changes, for example, or we can maybe leave this as a placeholder and come back to it if, some of the other more particular questions, bring us back here. So I just wanted to frame it that way. We're happy to take it however the commission and council would like.
The man with the hat looks like he has a comment.
I have just a quick question because my math brain isn't working really well this late at night, but I see at 121 units that it's going to give us 2.8% of our low-income housing. I see 1,505 units going to give us 78%. Is that about the same proportion?
No, I don't think so. I think you're going to get a lot more 100% lower income sites in the rezoning program at the densities that are needed for that. And then the gap, that 81% that yields, the rest of that's things like ADUs, pipeline projects, et cetera, that make up that other 20%.
Hey, Tiger, excuse me. I think having the spotlight on my picture is making it hard for me to follow along with what's going on. So I don't know if you can change that or if you have to have the spotlight on because it's making it hard for me to follow along.
Oh. Does it look better now?
Yeah, I just want to be able to see the screen as well. And so it constantly says that I'm the speaker. And so even when I hide, it's like self-view, I come back, I just want to be able to follow along a little bit better than I am.
I hear you. My concern was simply that I couldn't see you to notice if you needed to make a comment. However, if you don't mind simply interjecting when you have something to say, I have no mind with you interjecting.
Okay.
And after that, I'll do my best to remember that you are present with us. But that was for my sake, just to make sure that I don't leave you out. So.
I appreciate it. Thanks.
Yep. Thank you.
Mayor, can I make a suggestion that we start with the easy ones and end with the one on the screen?
Fine by me.
I don't know what's easier from your perspective, sewer or AB 2011. So I'm seeing thumb up for AB 2011. So just to recap, we had assumed reliance on this state law that would entitle qualifying applicants to 60 dwelling units per acre of density on these Highway 1 corridor sites. HCD's comment called into question our ability to rely on that without further analysis, which we don't feel like we can perform adequately. So the alternative, the next best thing from the staff's perspective, is to just rezone to 60 dwelling units per acre. These sites already were in the housing element at that density, put out for public comment, some decision maker consideration previously. No particular concerns about the density were raised at 60 dwelling units per acre. So we're hopeful that we can just take the local action to do it for these particular locations. But we've identified here, if there's concern about that, what the planning challenge would be to reduce the density below 60 and where those units would go to continue to make the math work for our other RHNA purposes.
Commissioner Ferguson?
Sorry, hard for me to cross-reference here, but were there any that we departed significantly from the 60 units per acre when we were doing objective design standards for these?
I think, Christian, if you don't mind, the 60 has not changed from what we reviewed.
Okay.
It's just, if I'm understanding correctly, a different law that we would be relying on locally.
No, I understood the question. I was wondering when we had gone through these sites, were there any that we lowered from 60?
No.
Because if not, then I see no issue.
Yeah, I can answer that in just a moment. I need to pull up a
I couldn't recall any,
presentation.
but I didn't know if we had.
So Pacific Manor Shopping Center is one example, site 27. So that is a site with a polygon, and very particular feedback was given about the interface along Palmetto Avenue and Bill Drake Way. So I suspect there are some others as well where some very specific feedback was given, but that's one by way of example.
What was the density change to for that, or what did we recommend for that site?
I'm not recalling a density change or number of unit recommendation change, but there was a suggestion to expand the polygon farther south and then to incorporate some corner commercial and questions about minimum commercial depth, that built interface with Palmetto, given the busyness of the street, children, pedestrians. That's some of the feedback that I remember.
Jog my memory, if we allow 60 units per acre, that doesn't pertain just to the polygon areas where we described, it's for the acreage of the whole site.
It's just in the polygon. And just for clarification, everywhere that 60 is shown on the AB 211 listed sites, 60 was shown on the sites that we reviewed in the polygons or outside where there were no polygons. Director Murdoch, if I'm not mistaken, you were saying that there were conversations about objective design standards that could potentially require reexamination because they may not allow us to achieve the 60, right? But we didn't actually specifically say there's 60 here, we want 40, or there's 60 here, we want 50.
Right, I think there was a very small share of the overall sites where the commission said, hey, we just aren't sure about this density or this number of units. I don't recall this being one of those sites.
Is there anyone who feels like we should not go this route? Because if not, it seems like it's a...
I think we're all pro this route.
Okay.
I mean, I think it's a silly question because Pacifica has a 35-foot height limit through most of the city, so there's nowhere that 60 units has happened. It's not just on the highways, but I think the local, to Commissioner Devine's comment about setbacks and development standards, I think this is a better path forward anyway.
I would agree. I think that after all the work that has been done to contribute to development standards, it would be a shame to have to completely let go of any sort of control in that nature. So I'm definitely for moving forward in this direction.
From my point of view, again, not being a planning commissioner and having not served as a planning commissioner prior to council service, I'm hearing the work that you put in, and I witnessed some of it. I remember quite laborious work that you were doing that particular evening. And I'm thinking of our public comment about listening to our community, incorporating the needs of our community. And in my view, that's what you're doing to the very best of your ability in light of the constraints that have been placed upon us, as the commenter, former Mayor Degree, so eloquently pointed out. So I appreciate your hard work to do that, and give us as much local control as possible.
We seem to be in agreement.
Great, thank you.
See, you didn't think it was all going to be easy.
We'll make up the time here, I'm sure. Comment B.3.9, Rockaway Sewer Pump Station. Commission and council made some progress, notably to remove sites 26 and 36 from this list at the last study session. So we've since made some progress with our wastewater team's consultant, which confirmed that they project that the I&I reductions from the sewer main replacements in Rockaway Beach and Valley Mar neighborhoods would be sufficient to create that corresponding capacity for the 200 or the 179 units specifically, I think, for the core arena sites in this location. Really, the question is, are there further modifications, any site switches or replacements or density changes here that would be needed, in part due to the infrastructure capacity constraint or just generally sort of back to the earlier global sites list?
Councilmember Beer, is this a place where you might want to interject?
Well, sure. I think it's really important for us to talk about the Seabold site. So I don't know. I'm not sure how you want to interject it, but after reading the public comments carefully. I feel like the night that we did talk about it was a really hard night on all of us, and it was really late at night, and I don't think we had enough time for conversation. And so if we can have that conversation tonight, I would really appreciate it. I feel like I have more information now than I did then. Is that what you wanted to hear, Tiger?
Well, I do believe that's the interest you expressed earlier, and I felt that now is probably the prudent time to follow through on that interest. So if you'd
Very
like
good.
to begin that conversation, by all means, please do.
Mayor, if I may, before we proceed, we do need to have a disclosure about a potential conflict of interest with Commissioner Devine.
Certainly. So we'll call you back in.
Thank you.
Do we need to have her declare what the conflict of
Yes,
interest
we
is?
do.
So
Thank
if you'd
you.
be so
Okay.
kind.
I own real property in Rockaway Beach neighborhood, and I am unable to participate in the discussion of the Seaball site.
And Mary, if it's not disturbing to your eye in this moment, Sarah, if you could bring her into our view so that we can see her speaking, that would be appreciated.
Planning Director Murdoch needs to make that change.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll do it in the course of trying to bring up a slide that will allow us to visualize the Seabowl site.
Fine, thank you very much.
City Clerk Coffey, I don't know if you have recommendations on any different view for me to use in this instance.
Let me see if I can adjust to pin.
Mary, is that view okay with you?
Yes, it is. Thank you.
Certainly. If you want to begin the conversation.
Yeah, sure. So I recognize the desire to like save Seabowl, for lack of a better term, or at least to be able to zone it so that there's some recreational value to the site. But I was concerned with the letters that we received from the owner of the property, for one. And then I believe it was the attorneys for the Toll Brothers who wrote in the second letter. And I just wanted to hear also from my colleagues what you think about that. Like, what could we really do outside of what the owner would like to do? Does anyone want to jump in on that? Like, I guess,
I'll let
what
other people
were
speak
we
first.
trying
I'd
to
love to jump in on
achieve specifically by taking it out last time?
Chair, it seems like you're the most poised to speak at this juncture.
Sure. So I think that when the Planning Commission discussed this site at our first meeting, we spoke a lot about how there were several main points of topic. One is that we all felt that this was an appropriate place for housing if there was a similar amount of neighborhood-serving commercial space preserved on the site. And that also piggybacked off of the city's own Cosmont study that identified this as a really important place to help bolster and corroborate the economics of Pacifica, which, as we know, there are not a lot of commercial spaces that do that. We also spoke about how this was a very important place for, this was one of the places of all the sites that we reviewed that we could really easily see height without disturbing a lot of people. So we talked about 55-foot height limit. We talked about how this would be a great site for affordable housing. And I think one thing, especially in light of some of the sewer catchment discussion, one thing seemed to become clear, at least to me, which is that this is a great site for mixed use that includes housing, and that the city's preservation of discretion is an important way to facilitate the best product type. Now, I wholly concur with the idea that the property owner does not have to sell this to a rock climbing gym or another bowling alley. But there are plenty of residential developers that build residential development and commercial spaces. And I think that the city deserves something that caters to people who need lower income housing, people that need neighborhood serving indoor commercial spaces. Any parent that lived through last season's bomb cyclones realized there was no place to go except here and Sanchez Art Center. And a place that really provides indoor neighborhood serving commercial to Pacificans. And I think that that's everything that I see on Nextdoor. It's everything that I've heard from community members. That's everything that I see in the Pacifica Mothers Club, that sentiment comports with all of those things.
Mayor. So I completely understand that, and I admire your ability to be able to see in such a wide view. But I think my concern is what in reality can we really do? So all of what you said was really great. But after reading the public comments and the letters that came in, I'm just concerned that if we take this out of the housing element now, I'm just concerned that what really could we do? And I don't know if there's any specific answer to that question, but I'm concerned with taking it out now after reading the comments.
So I have hands from Commissioner Berman and then Commissioner Wright.
Thank you. Chair Hauser, I think, summarized our initial discussion on this site very well, and I agree with her summary. A couple months ago when we did have that discussion, I do think that this is an appropriate site for housing, and I know we were starting to talk about how we could apply as many objective standards to the site to help guide the development here. And I'm wondering if perhaps that could be the solution, or will we run around in a circle and perhaps not get anywhere? So trying to define as much criteria for development on this site to ensure that we have that visitor serving commercial that we would like.
Commissioner Wright.
I think our chair and our former chair put it very, very well. I think we were very much in complete agreement on this one particular site. I think we made a lot of compromises in terms of offering height in order to try to preserve that commercial space. And I just think what we decided in terms of setting up some guidelines is really important. But I also recognize that it's council's ability to overrule us if that's what they want to do.
Another item on this, if this site were removed from the housing element, it doesn't mean that there can't be housing built on it. I just want to make sure that that's understood by everyone. I still think that it is beneficial to have in the housing element because it does give more incentive to develop here, and this is one of the largest sites in our city and a good opportunity for mixed-use development. But just to be clear, if it's not in the housing element, there could still be housing built here.
Mayor, I should probably provide a little bit of background. I completely agree with Commissioner Berman, but that would require, under the normal land use planning process, a general plan amendment and rezoning. The site in the current general plan does not allow residential development. Now, there are some caveats to this explanation that not appropriate to get into more detail about tonight in terms of the particular application that's been submitted for the site that could undercut or change some of this explanation. But under the normal process, the developer would simply need to make the application and convince the city council that a general plan amendment and rezoning is appropriate. And that could often occur through a, conversation, discussions, negotiations with the city to ensure that they've structured a project that reflects the community's needs, an appropriate amount of housing and an appropriate amount and type of commercial development. And so putting it in the housing element, similar to the AB 2011 discussion, would probably cause the city to lose some of that negotiating power or ability to influence with local control the ultimate outcome of the site. We can't control some of the provisions of state law that might bypass that local process, but if you're interested in setting up the best local control process for the site, leaving it out of the housing element is probably the best way for you to do that at this point in time until it's really more clear about what the community and the council and the planning commission's ultimate desires are for the site. And again, to put this in the housing element and to commit to doing a rezoning and general plan amendment that would allow housing now would just advance that process closer to them being able to get approval for a project at some point, possibly before we have the time to do the more particular phase 2 objective standards development, for example.
And just to add, we're not commenting on their particular proposal now, but just to say that it doesn't include any commercial now, right? So
that's my understanding, and depending on how you look at the site, one could argue that it would be mixed use given the Pacifica brewery is there. So there are varying perspectives on that point, but the specific development proposal, to my knowledge, would not include commercial use. And so that's a policy decision ultimately for the City Council and Planning Commission.
I'm sorry, is the Pacifica Brewery not a separate parcel?
It is, to my knowledge. I'm just saying, if you were to look really at the functional site, one could argue that the site, right, the Seabowl site, has commercial use on it.
Councilmember Beer.
Thank you, Commissioner Berman. I really appreciated how you explained that. I just want to make sure that we're able to have relationships with these developers so that when it does come time that we can actually talk about community benefits with them and that it's not going to just, be out of our control totally. But I just want to make sure that we're creating an atmosphere where we can have a relationship with them and not be battling with them the whole time.
Agreed.
Yeah, I agree with that too. And as much as we love that building, it's probably going to go away with a development, and that's something we have to recognize and mourn. But I agree, this is a site that is zoned, commercial recreation, and it's an important need in our community. So the more control we can keep to have those conversations and have a more important seat at the table, let's say, would be important to me.
Commissioner Ferguson.
I guess I'm struggling with the way that this is being framed. To my mind, this is a site that is currently zoned for no residential, and we spent a lot of time and did a lot of thoughtful deliberation on how to allow residential as a concession to this property owner, right, and to achieve a goal. The project that I've seen come through public comment doesn't do that much to advance our arena needs, and it takes away all of the thoughtful discussion we did. And it's just, it's contrary to what any constituent in Pacifica would want from you. I think that the worst of what is being expected of this development is what's being proposed. And the idea to bend over backwards to help this one particular project, I don't understand where we're coming from there. I feel like we've talked about a lot of concessions already. Then asking to have everything and no commercial, I don't understand the purpose of it, right? Which is what we just did with the allowing mixed-use developments, saying you have to have commercial and residential, right? This is the exact case study of what we're talking about. So I don't feel like there's any reason to make this concession here.
And I just wanted to add and confirm to the record that we're actually not considering any specific proposal here or any application, but the question is really whether we want to re-add the site back to the housing element to include any residential component in there. So I just wanted to confirm that there's that's the crux of the conversation.
One other thing, correct me if I'm wrong, but this site is in the area that feeds into the Rockaway Beach pump station, so we were looking for areas to remove from the list in that area anyways, and we as a group decided that this was a good one to remove, so given the number of units and the capacity issue, it's them or it's someone else, right? Whether it's this or Site 38, someone is coming off the list.
I think the direction we've given largely comports with our understanding, with the public understanding, with the economic study, and the part that I was swayed by the sentiments conveyed by the letters we received, but what I don't understand is why it is the developer could not help us with the need of our community while simultaneously following through on their desire. And it strikes me that given the scope of what the developer seems poised to accomplish, it seems like they should be able to accommodate all needs. And that's my bottom line.
Or at least a compromise. I saw no compromise in their proposal.
Well, their proposal are notwithstanding, because as attorney pointed out, their proposal is not something we're considering at this juncture. Commissioner Godwin.
Yeah, I just wanted to add my comments that I support Commissioner Ferguson's position that I don't see any reason to rediscuss this issue at this point. I didn't see anything in the letters that were insightful enough and interesting enough that it's worth the whole group's time to change any decision.
Councilmember Beer.
Yeah, I just want to make it really clear that I absolutely understand the community's need for recreation and commercial space. And so, but I also wanted to make sure that the folks that sent in their letters, the people who own the brewery, the people who own the property, that they are also part of our community. And I wanted to make sure that they knew that they were heard tonight, just like, any other public comment would be. And so I appreciate the conversation, and I see where the consensus is. There we go.
And I do think that the feedback we received bore the conversation that we just had, so thank you for bringing it to the fore, Councilmember Beer. So I think we're settled on that.
If the mayor doesn't mind, I think it would be great to see the sites in the catchment area again. And
So if we're done with that site, I think I'd favor a 10-minute recess. Commissioner Berman, I think, is going to be heading home for the evening, and we
Yes.
need to call Commissioner Devine back to the dais.
Thank you, Mayor. I would appreciate a recess, and I do have to depart, so thank you, everyone.
It's so good to have you back.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
All right, so we'll reconvene at 9:16. missing a Berman.
Tiger and I go a lot.
I know.
I always bring one of these.
PCT, how are we doing? Are we good to go? Staff, are we prepared? Everyone assume your positions.
Scoot over here.
Well, now you have more than enough room.
Here, I'm gonna even switch seats.
Okay, we are reconvening at 9:19. We are now absent a Commissioner Berman, and we are ready to go on. Chair Hauser, do you have a suggestion where we might continue our journey?
Yes. I think the Planning Commission, on some of the surplus buffer sites that are still left, I think there were a couple of these that were difficult for us to have standards on. And I wonder if this would be the appropriate time to speak about the Rockaway Highlands project and the surplus buffer sites on the list.
Director Murdoch, any initial thoughts as we dive in?
Just referencing by site number would help for all of us to follow along. And then I heard you mention the Rockaway Highlands. Is that in relation to the public comment?
Yes.
Okay.
So,
And I think that was adjacent to site 38?
yes,
If
so
I'm not
site
mistaken.
site 38, and then I believe the Planning Commission had a hard time with sites 34, which were Valleymar Station, and an easier time with site 35, but I wouldn't say it was a very easy time. So, but we were able to come up with development standards for site 35, but not site 34. Yes, so the rock, which is across the lane, we were able to come up with, but Valleymar Station, I believe, and someone else can jump in here, but our core conversation centered around how you would access the site without having a safety issue.
I have a few questions. Is site 34 under multiple ownerships also, right? Because there's several different businesses in that area existing now.
To my knowledge, the site's owned by one controlling property owner, and there's just a bunch of different buildings there.
Okay. And then I was checking while they were making comments, and Site 38 is not currently in HPD in the general plan, but I know the general plan was going to include other sites that were steeper. I can't remember, 30 or 35% slope, and I'm just wondering if we have any information. I mean, do we, if you know, where the other sites are more flat and along the freeway, you know, this is more up in the hills and more visible, whether that's something that we really want to consider. But I don't have a good visual of the slope.
If we do add this site, it's a great question, Councilmember Bowles. If we do add this site, Director Murdoch, my assumption would be that you would ask the Planning Commission to come up with development standards, like the same 6 objective standards for any added sites?
Time permitting, yes. So we are contemplating a process where we take this feedback and prepare an updated draft and work that through the adoption process. So it may be sort of in conjunction with that process that we might be talking about that site.
The only reason I asked that question, Councilmember Bowles, is because there were a couple of other sites close to Pavilion of Flowers that also had grading issues where we did look at height limits that were potentially more telescoping to comport more with the grading, the natural grading.
Right. And I mean, just looking at what they provided us, you know, there's a bit of step back, but it's a pretty big height, and if that's already up the hill some, you know, I would want those standards to be looked at very carefully before committing to that.
Commissioner Godwin, or sorry, yeah, Commissioner Godwin. No?
No, I'm good.
It was a pen, Commissioner Ferguson.
Procedurally, if someone was to propose a development that is currently two separate parcels, but one of them is in the housing element, and they were to propose to combine them into one parcel, would it then fall under the Corina sites, or would it be a separate, would it kind of be hybrid or go off on its own? Do you understand where I'm going with this? It sounds like someone is going to propose, and I'm sure this won't be the only place where this happens, there'll be a site that part of the parcel is in arena site and part of it is not, and if they then are combined to create one application, do those fall under the arena guidelines and the objective standards we've set up?
I have a possible follow-on question to that. If we were to add these other chunks, might that become a Site 39 under surplus rather than an add-on to 38 core?
In order to answer your question, if an application comes in that includes two different parcels, one that is arena site and has specific zoning assigned to it, and another parcel that has different zoning assigned to it, it would be analyzed based on the zoning of the various components of the project. So each component of the site would be analyzed basically separately with respect to that zoning, but all as a part of one application. So if there's two portions of a site and one portion is core arena, just because the other portion is included in the application, it doesn't become core arena as well. It still retains its underlying zoning, general plan designation, et cetera.
Great, thank you.
And Mayor, to circle back to Councilmember Bowles' point about the general plan and areas proposed for Hillside Preservation District, on my admittedly quick read of the general plan, I'm not seeing the Site 38 extension, if we'll call it that, as being proposed as one of the new HPD designations. The council doesn't need it to be in the general plan as such to add a site to the HPD, but it's not currently identified in the general plan for that purpose. And then I'll just circle back to a point that was made earlier by Commissioner Berman. A site need not be in the housing element for housing to potentially be constructed. And that's all the more true with respect to this Site 38 adjunct or addition. That site, that parcel's already designated low-density residential in the general plan. And so some amount of housing could already go there, and it's unclear. I mean, I haven't done the analysis, certainly based on the public comments tonight, but what the density would need to be increased to potentially accommodate this project, and whether that's something the council and commission's interested in entertaining at this point in time.
Just to clarify, I think I heard Commissioner Ferguson, I believe, someone asked if this is in the catchment area?
Correct, and it is. So if there was a desire to add it, again, sort of back to my alternatives for you to consider, first preference, not to add more sites into the catchment area. Really, second preference to be swapping a site for another, and then third to be adding it, but as a buffer site only.
So without much deliberation, I'm very open. I don't know what my opinion is on this, but my immediate, my gut opinion is that if we do add this as surplus, which I believe was Director Murdoch's, if we are going to add it, to do it as surplus and not core. Mm-hmm. If we did add this as surplus and replaced Site 34, the Valleymar Station site, and I mean, if we're sticking to the 180 units that we heard from the community member, we could also take off the rock, that's Site 35. I think that just feels better to me, but totally haven't analyzed it really.
Sorry, I just want to say I had an issue with the rock site too, because that's also, commercial, I don't know, recreation or visitor serving commercial. And again, that's like a great place for a restaurant or so that could bring some money in. So I'm open to that. And the other thing I was thinking is, their drawing also has this possible building on the church property. And I appreciate that they're talking to the church. And now that SB 4 has passed, that allows affordable housing on church property. So that, could also potentially be added into their project.
I don't know if it is possible to make those changes, but that feels a lot better to me as well. I have a real problem with site 34. It just seems completely unreasonable to me, and I know I've voiced my frustration about this in the past, but it's a massive safety problem, and I cannot visualize a development which would make sense there, but I understand the need to figure out a way to replace those units in some shape or form. If that looks like extending Site 38, that looks a heck of a lot better with this turnaround and this proposed conceptual site plan than anything I could possibly envision on 34.
To follow up on the question I was asking earlier, is it possible to break it up into two sites, the other two parcels that aren't currently included? For the sake of conversation, call it Site 39. Is that a thing we could do?
Believe that would be possible, yes.
Because then if we're swapping out surplus for surplus, I would think that would be kind of the easiest way to go about it. Keep the 38 as core and then surplus 39, if the math works out.
Yeah, that's where I thought we were going to, and it was my suggestion also. Just a new site and remove 34.
And anything here is going to need CEQA review, right? Because part of what I'm remembering is that there's a big water flow along that area and then down into the quarry. And so just making sure that, the surface drainage is really planned out.
All the sites that are on here, including any that we add, need CEQA, like project-specific CEQA review.
Is that right where that little lake forms every winter without fail that you drive through for a couple of months? That'd be great if it helped with the drainage.
Is that what that water retention? I'm just joking.
All right. I think we're.
So do the units work out? I mean, I don't remember how many units are 30. Oh, the rock is 35. I can show you. Where it is. It's this one.
Commissioner Wright.
I'd just like staff to potentially address one potential concern of mine in thinking about this. I understand that we had concerns with the Valimar Station thing. The advantage of Seabowl is that there was a light there to control the flow of traffic, so that kind of eliminated part of the traffic concern. I see in this diagram that he presented that there's a nice deceleration lane for exiting the highway to get into the unit, but I'm a little bit concerned about the same safety concern about how they are going to enter the highway, particularly at peak traffic times when traffic along the highway is moving at a fairly high speed. And I was wondering if it's staff's opinion that we could handle that in a safe way.
I'm not sure I can offer an opinion about that level of traffic design at this point. Folks access those sites, to the south of Valimar Station from the south, so certainly access can be provided safely, but the degree to which it might, cause congestion or delay, I don't know.
So do you see any noticeable difference between this site and the sites that we expressed safety concerns about from a safety perspective?
My sense is that moving the site away from the intersection probably reduces some of the congestion and vehicle conflicts that might arise, but that's a very preliminary, non-traffic engineer opinion for me to try to offer to you, highly qualified and not in a good way kind of statement. So probably pulling it away from that very busy congested intersection might be a benefit, but beyond that, I'm not sure what other delays or impacts might result.
Yeah, other than that, I'm completely in concurrence with the rest of the consensus.
I think the site has a bigger frontage and more acreage, which lends itself to being able to, again, we're not analyzing a specific project,
right,
but like the configuration of the property lines alone without looking at the site plan, I think provide for a better opportunity than Valimar Station. I think if I'm reading correctly, Site 38 has 61 sites already. If I'm understanding correctly from the community member who provided this, there are 180 total, so that would be plus 120, which is then replacing 97 plus 32, which is math is 129. So we'd be losing 10 units in the buffer, and the question is that okay? 10 is small, but is it, everything counts, so what's your thought?
We were trying to do that math exercise quickly over here. So it's not clear that we'll get a comparable number of units overall by swapping 2 sites for the one in question. But it does reduce the impact of removing one or both of those sites. So certainly if we were to do 1 and not 2 removed, that would be easier in terms of the numbers, but we think we can probably make it work. We would yield 73 units if 60 units per acre were to be applied to this new site. So it softens the blow.
Vice Chair Leo.
Thank you, Mayor. Couple comments on this one. So I would agree. My personal opinion is just removing one site, in particular site 34, in replacement of site 39 is what we're calling this one. My comment is also around just access to the site, right? So, and in particular comparison to Valamar Station, but this also applies anything between Fassler and Valamar Station on the east side of 1 is access, given that the majority of people who would reside here along this corridor would be coming from the north. Access will be tough, and it will be something we'll have to consider for any project of any of these sites, because you can't make a U-turn on Highway 1 at Fassler. You can't access from the north. And so I think in terms of any projects that come forward to us, we'll have to consider that, as well as impact on other sites. But we're not talking about any projects tonight, but I just wanted to throw out there, as we think of access and challenging sites, in my opinion, Valamar Station is actually better accessible than this site, but I would suggest removing site 34 in replacement of this for other considerations.
Mayor, there's one other variation brought up by the public commenter, which is to consider the Lutheran Church site as well, and perhaps a polygon for a subset of that. Gives us some additional acreage. The development concept's already somewhat evolving in that way. And so it would also, I think, minimize potential unit losses, even to the buffer units, which are important. So I don't know that we could diagram and give you specific acreage and units, but having more area to work with sort of a broad guidance along that line would give us some additional units that we could try to offset with that trade.
Just to clarify my comment, Director Murdoch, when I was saying I would support, I was including the church property in 39 as well. So I was including all 3 parcels in the polygon, 1 being 38 and 2 being the new 39.
Understood. Thank you.
Does that change? Did we all kind of agree? Okay.
And does that give us enough units to take out both of those sites then? And then both of those other sites were all affordable units. So is that what the developer said that's not his intention also, but.
Right. We would need some more time to try to do that calculation, but certainly the site's big enough in terms of acreage at the church site. I think even with half of that site, the upper half, I think we could probably get very close, if not equivalency in the number of units, and try to match the income levels as closely as possible as well.
I'm going to be happy to go along with consensus either way, but I do want to point out that we are talking about surplus buffer sites, and if we wind up taking out the worst of the 2 and leaving the 1 in lieu of what we need in order to make sure, I'm also comfortable with that, and I just wanted to throw that thought out there. Though I am willing to go along with consensus should the math pen out in terms of the lack of loss from staff side.
I'm comfortable with leaving site 35. Maybe this is not worded well, but I think we kind of have to take out site 34 based on the planning commission, if there's an opportunity based on our review. 35, what if we left that to staff's discretion, and if they needed it, then they could make that assertion?
Or if we could reduce some of the units and leave some commercial space, that would make me happy too.
Is the 32, though, based on, Director Murdoch, is that based on the current zoning? Because it currently allows residential.
Right, so Site 35 is a unique site. There is zoning there that requires a public vote to rezone. And so we have assumed the site under the current zoning without a public vote. So that's limited to the 21.8 units per acre. So it's artificially lower density than we might otherwise contemplate for the site. That very issue, I think, adds some complexity, and if we're adding another site where we could potentially make up those units, my first preference would be to try to find a way to remove Site 35 just to simplify the access concerns, the commercial preferences, et cetera. If we just come up short during our other calculations, maybe we would keep a nominal number of units on the site.
I like your at the discretion of the director nomenclature.
I'm good with that.
Does that adequately, I feel like we've now removed units from the pump station area. Have we adequately done that?
I think we're
Yeah, I think the,
to the same number, right?
the goal will be the net number is the same. They would all be buffer sites, and so I think analytically, we'd be in a good position as well.
Yes, and that I understand and I appreciate it. I asked that very clunkily. I believe you were trying to get to 180 units in the area. Have we done that appropriately already?
Right, if we leave Site 38 alone without changing it, yes, so then we would have sites 10, 11, and 38 as the core arena units, 179 total. We've got analyzed capacity with the sewer main capital project. No need for any change there from the staff's perspective.
I think this is a more than fair compromise, and I really want to thank Kirk Miller. This has been a bone for me of contention, and you really just came up with a wonderful compromise for us, so thank you.
I do wish to check in with Councilmember Beer to at least make sure you're still with us if you don't have anything to contribute to the conversation.
I would just like to, if you could go over specifically all the changes that you just made, so I'm super clear, that'd be great.
Chair?
Sure. So, I don't know, Councilmember Beer, if you can see the screen, but there were no changes to the core arena numbers, so sites 10, 11, and 38, there are no changes. Of the surplus buffer sites, Site 12 is staying. Site 34, which is Valleymar Station, is coming off. That was a big safety discussion that Planning Commission had. And then Site 35 will be at the discretion of Director Murdoch if they need it. We are adding 2 parcels behind, and I hope you receive this with the public comment, but we are adding 2 parcels that are behind and adjacent to Site 38. It's the Lutheran Church and the site behind the Rockaway Highlands. Those will be a new Site 39 in the surplus site list.
Great, okay. I was following along pretty well, so that's good. Good
Perfect.
news. Thank you.
Do we have all the direction we need on this one?
I think that's all the direction, thank you, on that comment
Okay.
number.
One to go?
Best for last.
So then I think that leaves us with the overall sites list topic. In the restructuring, the prioritization of the sites, core arena versus buffer surplus, a lot of thought has gone into that for the various criteria that HCD applies to analyze the housing element sites inventory, the constraints analysis, affirmatively furthering fair housing, ensuring that core arena sites are distributed fairly throughout the community, areas of high opportunity, so on and so forth.
I have a question about Site 23, and this is the one you might need to step out. before, but let's just see if there are other questions.
Are we talking about Sanchez Art Center?
Apparently we are.
And,
So therefore, I need to recuse because, and step away because I own real property in the vicinity of Site 23.
So my question is really why we think it's best for it to be a buffer site instead of a core site. Just because obviously sites that the city owns are easier and maybe more likely to be developed for affordable housing, and this is our biggest one. Maybe it doesn't matter because core and buffer mean the same thing in terms of the rezoning, but I don't know, just in terms of prioritizing our work and, you know, going through the SLA process and so forth.
Right. We're comparing our notes right now. I'm not sure we have a compelling reason why it couldn't become a core arena site. It does have some potential challenges to future redevelopment, in part trying to preserve an equivalent amount of community art space, for example, integration with the sports fields. And so I think, you know, it may be best as a buffer site, but there's nothing clear and convincing as to why it shouldn't be. Right, and then similar to one of the other sites, the St. Peter Catholic Church site, Site 37, sorry. So with Site 23, the Sanchez Art Center, it is zoned agriculture, and so this would be on par with the other discussion about farm worker housing, so that would be the priority use for the site. To have different housing would require a vote of the people to rezone the site. So asking to think about this site as a buffer site essentially for a farm worker housing project of some sort led by the city in a development process.
Did you say developing 23 would have to go to a vote of the people?
Not developing it, but to rezone it to something other than agriculture. So to have a housing type other than farm worker housing, for example.
Gotcha.
At anything more than one unit effectively would require that public vote.
Okay.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that, which does add a burden, but HCD is going to know that burden anyway, right? Well, unless you're zoning it for farm worker housing. I guess my issue with farm worker housing is that we don't know how many we actually have in Pacifica, but I think we have a much greater need for affordable housing that's broader than farm worker housing here. And so it would be my preference to, you know, have that be available for more portions of the community.
In that case, that would be an argument in favor of keeping it as a buffer site because of the potential voter approval constraint related to rezoning it to some other housing type. So, you know, if you were inclined to consider it as a farm worker housing site, transition to core arena might be more sensible. To think about a different housing type, very much should keep it as a buffer site.
If we were to move it to a core site, would that mean we would have to basically SLA it immediately?
Well, with all of the public sites that are indicated in here, we're committing to a program to very aggressively undertake the Surplus Land Act process. So I'm not sure that would likely change.
So that's inclusive of buffer zones or sites?
Right. We have a city-owned site program that's irrespective of the core arena or buffer surplus.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you. Commissioner Ferguson.
Yeah, it might be moot after that discussion, but I was curious if developing it as deed-restricted farm worker housing would require any vote, even if the actual agricultural practices weren't happening on site, or the land is zoned or agricultural, but does that include some kind of housing for agricultural purposes, even if there's no agriculture happening on site?
That would not require a vote of the people. So any property that's zoned ag could be used for housing, but it would have to be used for farm worker housing without a vote of the people, which is why my understanding is that there are two sites that have that constraint. And one of those sites is in the core arena, and then one was included as a buffer.
Okay. Right, and the other one's an existing capacity site on that basis, and it's associated with the St. Peter Church.
Yep, I remember the discussion. Thank you.
Really quickly, I think I know that the answer is no, but I want to double check. If we go through an SLA process and we get a developer that's going to do like market rate housing with 25% below market rate, which is the minimum, obviously, do we have to, if we get like one person, we don't have to sell to them, right? We could.
That all depends on what's put in the notice of availability in terms of what sort of project that we want, and assuming that HCD approves the form of notice, et cetera. But if there is a project that's proposed, we do have to engage in good faith negotiations with the developer.
So if we said we want, I'm like making this up, but like we want 75% deed restricted affordable farm worker housing and 25 above market rate or like market rate farm worker housing with a ground floor community space that would be an art center. And then no one showed up for that except like a market rate developer that was going to do the 25%. That wouldn't meet the criteria of the notice.
So one other thing to keep in mind is that there are some exceptions to the Surplus Lands Act for certain type levels of affordability. So if it really is intended for the city to work with a developer to develop an affordable housing complex with that level of affordability, we may not need to go through the full notice of availability process. So there are various exceptions, and we would have to look at that all on a kind of case-by-case basis as we're moving forward. Yeah, and in addition, if nobody does respond to the notice, then the city can develop outside of the SLA process, but still with the deed restrictions recorded against the property. Yeah.
Commissioner Wright.
If that was the case, would that endanger our ability to maintain the art space, to maintain the soccer field? Are there ways to protect that?
There are ways to protect that, and that would be through the form of the notice and what portion of the site would be available to develop. And those would all be things that the city would consider as we go through the process.
Yeah, because we as a commission went through extensive work looking at that particular site, outlining exactly what it was that we would like to see. And I just want to make sure that all that work doesn't go spiraling down.
Yeah, understood. Those are very good questions, and certainly things that we'll need to consider as we go through the Surplus Lands Act process. And we also don't need to include the entirety of a parcel. It can be a portion of a parcel through the notice process.
Which is, I think the polygon was defined on this one. But bringing it back to, I think, the original question, which was from Councilmember Bowles, I think the question is, do we want to keep this a core arena, a buffer site, or do we want to make this a core arena site? And I don't know what your thought is after hearing the discussion.
Well, I think after hearing Planning Director Murdoch talk about the vote of the people being required if we want something other than farm worker housing, and then that being better as a buffer, that's probably where I'd rather keep it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Can I ask one more question that I should have asked when we did farm worker housing at the 925 meeting? What happens if, and maybe this is just a requirement, but what happens if somebody buys or rents this unit as a farm worker and then changes jobs? Do they lose their housing?
And/or what's the definition of a farm worker? Is 10 hours a week, or does it have to be a full-time job?
That's a good question. I don't know the specifics of that answer, but typically for affordable housing agreements, let's say that someone's income does go up, there's a certain period of time where you're allowed to stay, and there are terms that are negotiated in terms of an affordable housing agreement. But in certain circumstances, that would require someone to move into a market rate housing.
So.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but in my experience, farm worker housing is typically leased by the agricultural operation, not the individual farm worker. anybody knows better, but that's been my limited experience.
Yeah, admittedly, I don't have enough knowledge about the particular operational arrangements of farm worker housing at this point. One of the things that was directed at the 925 meeting was to engage with those regional partners that are familiar with farm worker housing and their needs, and to figure out how that might be structured successfully if this site or the other site were to be developed.
I see Sandy nodding a little bit and Sabina sitting up a little bit. Do either of you have comments to add to that?
Hi, thank you. Good evening. I could just provide a little bit of information about HCD's requirements for the farm worker housing. So the requirement is that you have to analyze the need for farm worker housing in your community. And then if there is a need, provide for programs or policies that support allowing that type of housing to develop in your community. With our initial assessment of farm worker housing need in Pacifica, we used census data provided by 21 Elements, who provided a lot of the data for the housing element. And it is a very small, minimal need. I don't have the exact number. And so our initial approach to answer this question for HCD was to talk about farm worker housing in the same way that we were talking about housing for extremely low income households, and through incentivizing and supporting extremely low income units, we would be also providing housing for farm workers who are typically also lower income. And so HCD's comment to us was that we needed to maybe strengthen policies or programs to allow for farm worker housing. And one of the things that we need to do is make sure that the local zoning code conforms with regulations that define employee housing and farm worker housing in your code, and make sure that these types of housings are allowed and not being constrained. But you don't necessarily need to define a specific site for farm worker housing in your housing element. You just need to allow for the capacity of that type of housing that would meet that need to develop.
Thank you very much.
Before she leaves, could she shed some light on what counts as farm worker housing? Does somebody working in a hydroponics greenhouse count as a farm worker? Does a gardener count as a farm worker? Who counts as a farm worker?
I would have to look into that. I don't know the answer to that question specifically.
And I think I read that like ranches count, and we do have some ranches, like thinking about Shamrock, for example.
Yeah.
So I don't know if those are in the needs analysis in that count or not.
It's based on census data, so it is, not the most localized data. But that's kind of the standard that all the communities I've seen are using to analyze this specific population. And also HCD didn't have an issue with the measure, of the need. It was more just making sure that the local zoning allows this type of housing to develop.
And these are all really good questions, and certainly, as we're implementing programs from the housing element, all things that we will consider.
One thing that I think would be really interesting is to see if we could broaden the definition of a farm worker to be more consistent with like that extremely low income, like figure out how to get the people who need the housing into the housing.
Is that the end of your questions around Site 23? And does anybody else have a question or comment around Site 23? If not, if you'd be so kind as to invite Councilmember Beckmeyer back into the conversation. Any other sites that anyone wants to discuss? Chair Hauser.
I have one more, but I'm willing to see if, I'm willing to go last. Does anyone have one? No? Can we speak about Site A briefly?
A is an alpha.
Yes, thank you. which is the religious property. And so the church that we kind of added when we were looking at potential additional sites, the reason I wanted to talk about this is because even though the whole site is shown in this diagram, in the site-specific, I don't even know if we did a polygon for this in the appendix that went to HCD, Director Murdoch, but I know that we used there was an image shown at the planning, exactly, that image, where it's like that bottom L in the parking lot, and that equates to a potential 23 homes on this site, which is otherwise, I want to say, if I'm remembering correctly, like 4 or 5 acres. And considering all of the opportunities that are happening with state law and religious sites, and the fact that when religious sites tend to redevelop housing, they usually like draw a lower income level, I wonder if it would be, I wonder if it would be a good idea to increase the polygon on this one to potentially include half the site or even the whole site, the latter of which I would be supportive of, with the thought that maybe we can get some high-quality, lower-income housing here.
Couple thoughts from the staff perspective on that. This site is different than the other two religious sites that we've talked about tonight. The first being the St. Peter Church site that was already on the list, and then the potential addition of the Lutheran Church site. Both of those we've identified, or the potential exists for areas of the site that are undeveloped and not in some other particular use right now to serve as the site. This site, the Latter-day Saints Site A, is unique in that really the entirety of the site is put to some intentional use at this point in time, either the church building or the parking lot. So one concern I have, and I'd welcome input from Sandy or others on the team, is that the realistic assumptions related to that, if we were to say, okay, half the site or the building, for example, needed to be redeveloped. The other part of the response is that there would be nothing preventing them from saying, oh, you know what, if we're going to do this 0.9 acre share of the site, let's do the whole thing, and seeking approval for that as part of a development process, or availing themselves of some entitlement in state law as part of a religious site. But those are my initial reactions, and we can explore the options for how to increase the polygon.
Am I correct in that the site is still a buffer site? It was at the last meeting, but I didn't print the new map. No, it's a core site. Oh, that's okay.
Core arena site.
I mean, yeah. I haven't seen it full. I've only gone by a handful of times in doing this process, but what I like about this site is that it's off of Sharp Park, which doesn't have a traffic issue. It's in an area of Pacifica that doesn't have a lot of other housing sites clustered around, and it's surrounded by housing on 3 sides, which to me makes for good urban planning. So I totally understand what you're saying. I'm not sure.
What occurs to me, because I don't know how utilized the parking is, so that's key when you're trying to do both church and housing, because on Sunday mornings, everybody needs the parking. Other times of the week, it works, but on Sunday morning, everybody's home or everybody's at the service, or whenever their services are.
Sure.
And so I don't know. So if they have surplus parking, I mean, they have a ton of parking there. I think I would be inclined along your line of thinking that expanding the polygon so you get 50 units makes it a more feasible project.
Yeah.
So maybe that's just extending the line out and taking that next row of parking. I don't know, but it all depends on whether the parking's used or
yeah. I totally concur with the idea.
Or increasing the density.
That the site geometry and the low unit count are probably not attractive, and like that 50 sweet spot with a better polygon, yeah.
I mean,
One other option, aside from or in concert with changing the polygon is considering whether a higher density would be appropriate as well. It's currently proposed at 30 units per acre. So 40 or 50 or 60 would also fit in line with the overall housing element construct. And so, let's just say 40 and then expanded polygon, it could maybe split the difference in those constraints.
Commissioner Godwin.
Yeah, I just wanted to make one comment about this. The Latter-day Saints people own all the property all over the world in a single corporation. They're fairly famous for their opacity and secrecy about how they handle their finances. I think if you try to combine anything with the property that they have an interest in, they own both their buildings and their real property that way, you're going to find them relatively unwilling to communicate with you and quite difficult process of getting that combined with another parcel. So I recommend you increase the density and leave their, if to the extent you're going to interact with that group, leave it as a unique interaction.
Councilmember Bowles, did you have something?
No, I was just going to say, I mean, you all had talked about changing the polygon anyway to something more rectangular, up towards Sharp Park Road instead of that L, which pulls it away from the housing too. I'm all for increasing the density to a project that might be able to get built, knowing, from what Commissioner Godwin, I mean, they may choose not to, but that's their choice. We're just rezoning. Right. It's not that we need more units, but this is a good place for affordable units.
Right.
Yeah.
From an urban planning perspective.
Right. You're not proposing taking out something else, right? This is in addition to the numbers we have.
Right.
I would be also in favor of enlarging it and adding density in order to make it more likely to be developed and also make it possibly realistic to do multiple floor parking to accommodate multiple uses, because you kind of got to give them the incentive to be able to do both and the return to be able to do both.
Yeah.
And just to clarify, we did take detailed note of the Planning Commission's suggested revised polygon as an oversight on my part, that polygon is not reflected here, but we do have one that essentially it's a straight line up and down this row of parking here, straight down to the bottom, and it would essentially omit a square of this portion of the site.
I'd
do the whole lot.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Mm-hmm. You said it so much more simply than I was going to say.
Can you confirm the access? I mean, obviously there's a roundabout, but is there also access on Sharp Park Road directly? And the front of the church is there where the tree is off of Sharp Park Road?
No.
No. Oh, on the south side? Where is it?
The northeast side.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I kind of like not confining them to a rectangle because maybe they don't, want the circulation going through their site.
And maybe they want to, rebuild the church and provide housing to the people that work there, or housing to their parishioners, or I'm not sure what the right wording is, but it does increase their property value and does not require them to build it.
Christian, would you be opposed to the whole lot and 60 units per acre?
Commissioner Wright, can you clarify if you mean lot as in parking lot or lot as in
the
parcel?
whole blue area?
The whole parcel.
I don't think we want to go to 60 because that means a much taller building, right? Yeah.
I personally was comfortable with the whole parcel, but also maybe staying closer to 40, which I think is maybe more consistent with the single, this is surrounded by single-family homes, and it's on a hill. That's my own personal.
Probably going to be more comfortable with that too, but I would like to hear staff's insight as to Commissioner Wright's question.
You know, we would have to make the case that there's some basis that they'd be willing to redevelop the actual church that's there. I just think that's far-fetched. I would be more comfortable taking a part of the parking lot, maybe a larger part of the parking lot, but I just think, I mean, we have to tell HCD why we think the Latter-day Saints are going to rebuild their church. I just think that's... They might, but I don't know what we would use to substantiate that, especially since we haven't talked to them about it.
The image, as arbitrary as it might seem, that popped into my head when clarifying the polygon would be the left side of that parking lot, is that by eliminating that square that's rightmost in terms of what is on the screen, I would think it would be easier to form a two-story parking structure next to and on the lot, which might facilitate their aims while allowing them to build the housing that would frankly facilitate our aims. So I think that updated polygon to encompass that left-hand rectangular piece of the lot makes a lot of sense intuitively to me. Having had a friend or two who attended that church, it is counterintuitive to me to pursue robustly the notion of trying to assign the entire lot.
What if we both raised the line up to the top of the lot that we had added or had thought about at Planning Commission, but instead of removing the square on the bottom, we continued that polyline so that the 92.3 dimension went all the way to the eastern property line? And that way you keep the drive aisle and you keep parking.
I was thinking, just extend that over there.
Was that what you were thinking?
So continue the 198.87 all the way across.
Into the density.
Well, leaving the driveway up and down on the right side of the site. I think your arrow went a little too far to there, yeah.
That's what I was thinking.
Oh, is that a point of egress to the cul-de-sac?
Right, I think that goes to the
I did not
signalized
realize there was an
intersection
exit there.
off to College Drive.
Yeah, I didn't realize there was an exit there. Yes, agree. Correct, but what Councilmember Bowles is saying is, I didn't realize this was a secondary access point down there. Yeah.
Yeah, there's no parking.
According to the Google.
Looks like
Are you wanting to have a polygon, or could you just leave it flexible and just say 1 acre of the parking lot without defining the polygon? Or do you want the polygon, because that's what you've done for the other sites, to be consistent?
I would say 2 to 2.5 acres of the parking lot, based on like what we just talked about, and knowing that what's on the screen is about 0.9 acres. And then I'm like agnostic as to whether or not the polygon needs to be there. I think we can keep it flexible for them.
It would be more flexible if you didn't have a polygon, but I know that you wanted polygons on other sites, so I didn't know what your feeling was on this particular site.
I think the rationale for the polygons on other sites was because they were like
mixed use.
Mixed use, and like there were, like for example, Valleymar Station, which I know we just took out, but the polygon excluded the historic building.
Right.
So things that were like of value were specifically left off the polygon.
So Christian, what about no polygon and just say 2 acres? Okay, all right.
Right, if you'd allow me just a moment, I'll do an approximate measurement so we can better quantify the land area we'd be talking about with the polygon, and then get your direction whether to include the polygon or just assume that acreage of the overall site.
Some really big houses.
No.
Can you drop in a street view?
Right, so a polygon of the type described would be roughly 1.6 acres. So we could either keep the polygon concept to show that, full redevelopment of the site is not assumed, which might help our argument, at least to visualize that with HCD, or just say of the overall, over 4 acre site, only 1.6 acres is assumed in calculating the site potential.
I think that makes sense. Anybody? Yep. Any thoughts? Commissioner Ferguson? No? So I feel, does it sound like we have consensus?
Go for it.
Okay.
So, well, the other point to discuss briefly is if we're assuming 1.6 acres overall on the site without a polygon, if there's a desire to try to get to 50 units and figuring out what the density would be for that, there was some discussion earlier about trying to get a 50-unit project here to increase chances for affordable housing. So we haven't had that conversation yet. 30 dwelling units per acre doesn't get us there.
I believe I had heard 60 and 40, and I believe I heard a couple people more in the 40 camp.
Yeah, I think I'm good with 40, and that would get us there, I think.
Well, more to the
Me
point,
too.
40 gets us there?
Was that Councilmember Beer?
Yeah, I said me too. 40.
40. Yay, 40.
If 40 gets us there, I'm all in favor.
All right.
Hey, okay.
All good on 40?
Any
Okay.
disagreement? Okay. That's the only site I had. Does anyone have other sites to discuss in this? Yeah, and leave it in core, correct. Does anyone have other sites to discuss within this last B.3.1?
B.3.1.
The reorganization of housing sites. I'm just using the original numbers.
Just for the record, we'll be removing then from this map site 36 and site 34 before it goes back.
36 was already removed, that's the Seabolt. 34 and 35 removed was what was discussed tonight. That's Valley Mar Station and The Rock, north of the
Wasn't
Seabolt.
35 at your discretion?
Yes.
Right, if needed, right, with the priority to add the 2 sites peripheral to the site 38.
And just to double check, we do have the sewer capacity to handle what it is that we just talked about, right?
Correct. So this adjustment would not change the overall core arena number of units, which we've confirmed there would be sufficient sewer capacity to accommodate with incorporation of the Rockaway Beach and Valley Mar sewer main replacements. And then the additions would be surplus buffer sites, and so would not be applicable to the core arena.
Commissioner Ferguson, were you responding to the fact that the map that was shown tonight still has the Seabolt in green? I think it's just a diagrammatic.
Right, and we clarified and acknowledged in the staff report. We'll remove it once all of the guidance is confirmed this evening. Thank you.
Is there a follow-up question, Commissioner Ferguson?
Yeah, sorry, unrelated. Looking at this, sorry, can you go back to the Rockaway Sewer Pump Station, not knowing how our city's collection system works, does not the pump station in Lindemar pump up and over to the Rockaway Pump Station, which then feeds to the wastewater treatment plant? Because I don't know of a wastewater treatment plant in Lindemar.
There's a
Does
pump
anybody-
station, there's a sewer pump station and a stormwater pump station in Lindemar.
Yeah, pump station, but there's not a treatment plant.
No, all of the pump stations pump to the
Right, which would
treatment
lead me to
plant,
my
and-
next point, that we're only looking at this area feeding into the Rockaway Pump Station, but I think there's a reasonable chance that all of South Pacifica feeds through the Rockaway Pump Station, because it's the last pump station in line to the treatment plant. We might have placed this polygon in error.
So I'm relying on the wastewater division staff's
If they've
analysis
given you
here.
this, I trust it,
Yeah.
100%.
They've provided the catchment area boundary for this Rockaway Beach pump station, and they have not identified, I'm not saying one way or the other, but they have not identified flows from Lindemar Pump Station as a
Sure, it
contributing
just looks like
factor.
there's a sewer line depicted on this passing through there, but it could be storm drain versus sanitary sewer, and it's not delineated.
No, you're right, the diagram's a little confusing.
But Director Murdoch, I think you said in the presentation that you had checked with ISI and confirmed that the 180 was just in the, didn't staff confirm this recently? I think staff confirmed this.
I didn't hear the full question.
You mentioned for the B.3.9 infrastructure constraint, which is what I think Commissioner Ferguson is talking about, that at the last meeting on the 25th, we did not have the information about whether the 180 was an accurate number. And I believe what was presented tonight was there has since been further conversation that 179 units, which rounds up to the 180,
Right.
were appropriate, and it was just in this area in red.
Correct. So the consultant firm you mentioned is not one that I mentioned, but yes,
Oh, okay.
the technical analysis, correct. So the analysis was done by the city's consultant that the capacity that would essentially be gained by reducing the I&I through the sewer main replacements would allow the 179 units to be added to the Rockaway Beach catchment area.
Commissioner Ferguson, I don't know if you're able to zoom in on this picture on packet page 801 is where I'm looking at it. You might have a similar picture on a different, but it almost looks to me like that force main doesn't need to go through the Rockaway pump station in order to keep going. It looks like what comes up from the Lindemar and Anza pump stations over the hill could bypass through the force main. Is it look to you like it needs to stop at the Rockaway pump station in order to continue through?
I don't know how the system is designed. My guess is that the capacity issue is actually in the gravity collection systems for these neighborhoods and not the force main, if that's why they're highlighting it.
Okay.
Should we assume that there's not a problem and then ask staff to like triple confirm?
Right. What I can say again is my wastewater colleagues have not identified flows from the Lindemar pump station going northward to the plant to be a capacity constraint. And so we've focused our analysis on the Rockaway Beach pump station catchment area.
And just to add, I know there's several I&I projects in the Lindemar area in the works too.
Sorry for the distraction.
No, that's
Not
a
at
good
all.
question. Yeah.
So are there any other sites that anyone had interest in looking at? Mary, I can't see you. Do you have anything you're looking at?
I do not.
If not, does that mean
That we
we're
did it.
concluded?
We did it.
I have a
Wait.
little question, but not necessarily related to looking at the sites in detail, but
So before your question, let me just make sure we're through with the sites. Okay, what you got?
well, just looking at the diagram of sites 29 and 28, so they have now a little white area taken out of them. I don't know if that was, I guess I don't understand the white areas that are being taken out because I don't think they relate to the polygons that the Planning Commission worked on. So maybe you can explain those to me.
To use Site 29 as an example, there's the gray hole in the middle, and then the orange Corina site around it. What we did is map the assessor parcel boundaries. And in some cases, like in this case, there's a different assessor parcel right in the middle of the site. And so the proposed housing element site does not extend into that parcel. So to be more precise in terms of the assessor parcels in question, we removed it from the map. And then this site further, for example, has a polygon as a subset of Site 29 to precisely map where the boundaries of the housing element site would be located.
Okay. Are those buildings or are those parking lots?
It's parking lot. And so this was like the thing that we talked about, like that I was so confused about on the 25th. But the Fairmont Shopping Center and the Lindemar Shopping Center specifically have random APNs. And I think the Safeway in Manor has one as well.
Right.
They have random APNs over just parking spaces.
Right.
And the polygon doesn't overlap with that APN. So listing it as a housing element site is kind of misleading. So the donut is weird, but it makes more sense than the list.
Okay, and so why was this done for those two and not Manor? Because I know Manor has a hole too.
I think it's because the difference was on Manor. The parking lot parcel was specifically encroached upon by the polygon. Am I remembering that correctly, Dr.
Correct.
Murdoch? Yeah. So that one is intentionally in there.
Okay, okay. And we're not intending to, I mean, I'm still thinking of the school sites, which are kind of the more controversial in the community. Like, it would be really nice to just show on these maps the part of the parcels we're talking about. I don't know if that's possible.
Yeah, I hear the comment, and I agree. If in a perfect world, we would have that level of precision. We're trying to strike a balance of being accurate, but also at the scales that we're talking about, some of these parcels or sites would be so small they might not be evident on the map, for example. So really at this stage, the content and the substance is really important. We can continue to think about better or more accurate or more understandable ways to map as the housing element process evolves. For now, we're trying to be very clear about where the sites are, not spend too much time with the cartography side of this process because we know so much is in flux with sites, for example. But we can do our best to try to really dial that in a final map at some point.
I just want to jump on that. One thing that Dr. Murdoch and I talked a lot about was making sure that this Appendix F, which did have these polygons in, was both part of the housing element, but also that on these site map diagrams, there was a note that said, these are not housing sites. The housing sites for specific, areas are shown in Appendix F. And my hope would be that with whatever updates we're making, that those notes and the appendix both stay in the next draft.
They will be there, absolutely.
Thank you. I think that's helpful for the public, too, to see it all in one place.
Commissioner Wright?
I'd just like to take a second to acknowledge as much as this was a fair amount of work for us, it's nothing compared to the heavy lift that staff did for us, and I want to recognize them and appreciate them for what they're doing, trying to incorporate all our different ideas through this whole process. At the same time, I'm just really proud of our staff and how well they've done at handling this big lift after many other big lifts, Sharp Park, general plan, et cetera. Thank you.
I'll entertain more comments of that nature if anyone else would like to chime in. Don't be shy.
I would like to echo that and say that, I understand that there's a lot more. It's not even just this. All of the objective standards work that you guys are synthesizing for us and all of the research that went into it, thank you so much.
Ditto, and with all the work that you're doing in parallel, keeping all of our projects and working on our local coastal plan and the quarry and everything, I don't know how you sleep at night with all that running around in your head.
Do you sleep at night is the question, Councilmember Bowles.
Yeah, I have that problem too. But I also want to say, if there are really things that you feel are important that are done now, for example, these objective design standards, if it's really important to try to get these in by the end of January and you need a little bit more capacity and, consultant fees that aren't necessarily approved yet, I hope that you would come to us to ask for that too.
Thank you, Councilmember Bowles. I appreciate it. I think we're trying to carry this out. We can't exclusively focus on the housing element, unfortunately. So we are trying to be systematic and programmatic. And as much as we would like to try to front load more of that, even if we had unlimited money, I'm not sure if we could do it while also undertaking the local coastal land use plan work and planning for community engagement for that and so forth. So what we're trying to do now with objective standards is, again, keep that limited number, get them into the city's regulations as soon as possible, ideally as part of the phase 1 rezoning program. And then the stopgap in between is just getting these polygons into the housing element itself in the Appendix F. So each step we take, we're further refining and clarifying because we can't do it all at once, without other undesirable consequences, unfortunately.
Okay, understand. Thank you.
So my comments before I ask the questions and get us out of here. It feels like we've been running a very long marathon for several years now. it feels like we just passed 20 different general plans and local coastal land use updates, and we're maybe at a finish line for years' worth of work, which is predicated on a decade's worth of work, and it's maybe in sight of tying it up with something vaguely resembling a neat bow, maybe. It's extraordinary how much work has been done over the last several years, and it's extraordinary the tightness of the work that has needed to have happened lately, on top of the tightness of the Herculean efforts that were already made before. And it went from overwhelmingly gargantuan getting things done to now we're under the gun getting things done. And at any given moment in time, I feel the constraints between staff's needs, community's needs, and we send it to you. I see the look on your face. You come back and you have a solution in hand. And it's amazing to me that you don't just leave with that look on your face and then spend the entirety of the 3 weeks wanting to murder us, despite the no doubt 1 or 2 days you do, but that you then take that and instead of presumably thinking such thoughts, you turn into a positive that we can all rally behind. It's extraordinary to see that process at work, and we don't really get to see the process. We get to see the input and then the output, and just to behold the output in and of itself, and then have that waiting for us when we arrive so that we can work from that point rather than where we thought we left off. Thank you so much, and thank all of you, because this is a remarkable team effort. And looking at the entirety of the team in front of me, I know it's not the entirety of the team.
Thank you so much, Mayor.
So top to bottom, I haven't adequate words to express gratitude. That having been said, do you have the direction that you need?
We do. Thank you so much for the thoughtfulness tonight and on September 25th.
Any final thoughts before I say the magic words?
Sorry, if we're not going to do communications, just going to note that I will be probably off for the month of November, expanding family and that. I'm back in December, so my last commission for a little while. Thank you, guys.
Is that a congratulations in order?
Yes.
Soon to be, yeah, hopefully.
Great news. Thank you for sharing.
Congratulations, and may it proceed.
Yes.
In that case, the time is 10:31 and we are adjourned.